welcome to WRI India's event on decarbonizing India's road freight towards a cleaner, greener, and an electric future for commercial vehicles. So it's been a long time since we've had an in-person event in Bangalore. So it's good to have the room filled and also have this face-to-face conversation. So thank you first of all for making time and being here. It's good to have you all here. We also have a few of our speakers joining us on Zoom. So welcome you, thank you again. And lots of participants we see on Zoom too. So welcome to everyone. Just to kick off things, we'll start a brief video which will provide an overview of the current road freight ecosystem in India and sort of encapsulates WRI India's work in the past year about the rapidly evolving commercial freight electrification through the lenses of technology, policy, regulation, and finance. So we'll just have a brief video showcasing our work.
At the turn of the century, in 2000, India's total transport greenhouse gas emissions were 90 million tons, with just 71 million commercial vehicles. Since then, the landscape has shifted rapidly, and e-commerce activity has grown at a compound annual growth rate of 37% from 3.8 billion in 2009 to 76 billion in 2021. In a matter of 2 decades, emissions from commercial vehicles shot up immensely, accounting for 131 million tons of emissions in 2020. The modal shift from railways to road freight has also seen a 48% increase since 1950, leading to the tripling of oil demand in India, which is now the second highest globally. Therefore, it has become necessary to combat the adverse environmental impact of increased economic activity. WRI India has been undertaking comprehensive research on freight's rapidly evolving domestic ecosystem, analyzing both the supply and demand sides. We have been tracking states that are actively addressing the need to decarbonize the commercial freight sector by shifting to electric vehicles. We are also taking stock of key stakeholders in the value chain who are at the forefront of this significant shift, like battery solutions and charging infrastructure providers, original equipment manufacturers, mobility as a service, and logistic companies, and many more. We have also aggregated top models of electric commercial vehicles in India along with their payload and battery capacities, catering mainly to urban freight movements which come with salient specifications tailor-made for Indian conditions. Together, we envision a future where all commercial freight vehicles will be electrified, paving the way to India's complete decarbonization by 2070.
So that was a bit of an overview about our work this past year. Now I would request and invite Pawan Molukatla, Director of Electric Mobility and Energy Tech, WRI India, to give the opening address and set the context for today's event. Pawan.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this discussion on decarbonizing the freight sector. I think it's a beginning and just a start of many conversations that WRI India would be hosting. A warm welcome once again to everyone. I think just wanted to share some context. The video really talks about the freight sector, and all of you have been working in electrifying, whether it is in the small commercial vehicle, whether it's an LCV, MCV, I think HCV is little distance away right now. We'll also hear from Raghavendra, who is working on the HCV segment on what they intend to do. But I think what's the goal of this workshop? Couple of things. One is transition to electrification. We are seeing in two-wheeler segment and three-wheeler, and obviously buses. But freight, which is one of the largest emitters, uh, would be very, very critical if we're talking about achieving the net zero emissions for India. And we also do realize that the technology itself will take some time in Indian context to really evolve when we're talking about your high-end trailers. And they also debate, right, whether it is electrification. We also hear about hydrogen in, say, maybe 10, 15 years in India. Is that also a question? Because in the long-haul mobility, there's a discussion, whether it is EVs, whether it is hydrogen, and also rail, because we also have to clearly understand that in your business as usual and the alternative scenarios, there's also this big push to create not just the freight corridors for your road, but also parallelly for rail. So there is a lot of things that are happening in the ecosystem right now, the changes. And the question is, what is the pathway for freight electrification? We want to understand from all of you, your own experiences, and then take this as findings to engage with at the national level, of course, with MORTH, with Niti Aayog, with all the relevant stakeholders on how India should plan for electrification. I also wanted to set in the context of G20 that India will be hosting as the first presidency, right, which is going to happen from December 1st this year. And decarbonization of the transport is one of the topics that would be a big issue that all the 20 countries would be really discussing and will be planning for. So in that context also for us, this discussion is extremely important as a prelude or preparation from December when we'll be working with many of the other countries also, whether it is we are talking about technology transfer, whether we are talking about mutual cooperation, and identifying transport sector as one of the key sectors for achieving climate goals. I'm just setting the broader angle from which we are coming, looking at the global conversation, what is happening in the electrification context within India itself, and happy to be part of this discussion going forward and to learn and also to share our own views and to really come up with a position paper on how really India should look, and that would be something we'll get input from each of you today. So I think without further delay, I'll look forward to the conversation to participate more in the event itself, in the discussion, and be an active member there. I think we can have individual introductions, Rohan, right? Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Satish Lakkaraju and I represent Viz Freight. I think it's mentioned as Viz Transport. But I've been in the industry for the last 31 years. My last assignment was Chief Commercial Officer for South Asia for Agility, which got acquired by DSV. So Viz is basically a startup 18 months old, but we are 650 employees and we have a fleet of 2,500 trucks, of which we own 650 on our own. We're going global this year, 12 countries, next year 22, and subsequently 60. Our main funding comes from Tiger Global. So in Series A, we got 275 crores. But in our first year of inception, we are already a profitable organization. And I'm happy to be here on the subject of decarbonization in India's road freight, because this has been a subject which has been close to my heart, because the freight forwarding industry is one which got the industry status only 1 year back. Otherwise, it's the most disorganized sector in terms of it. So probably I'll give more inputs as we move forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nakul here. I am one of the founders at Cell Propulsion. At Cell Propulsion, we are involved in design and development of electric light-duty trucks, as well as the support ecosystem to enable their adoption by fleet owners and operators. Our focus currently is on 1-ton payload and above trucks to begin with, and over the coming years, we'll be looking at larger and heavier duty electric trucks as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Supratim. I look after the technology and product development at Cell Propulsion. Happy to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sudeep Maiti. I'm the program head in WRI-India.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raghavendra Maiso. I represent Move Technologies, one of the co-founders. We are a young firm focusing on heavy-duty vehicles, as Pawan already mentioned. We are definitely at a stage where when it comes to heavy duty, we are at early stage in terms of deployment in India. But at the same time, happy to share we are not at stage 0. We have seen in India deployment of a couple of tens of vehicles. But yes, if we have to solve emissions from the transportation segment, obviously that's the elephant in the room. We are definitely looking forward to see how we can mutually learn from each other and see how we can address this climate change problem. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Daryl Dias. I'm the director, co-founder at Magenta Mobility. We are an integrated EV charging, EV mobility, and a full stack software company where we offer complete mobility as a solution. At this point in time, we are present in, along with our vehicles, in charging infrastructure. We are present in about 14 states and 35 cities. The mobility is operational in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Mumbai, and Pune at this point in time.
Hi, morning. I'm Rohit. I head the business development for the electric mobility at Magenta Mobility. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jayant, co-founder and CEO of Grevol. We are a last mile delivery electric vehicle manufacturing company catering to the freight vehicles for the last mile delivery cities and basically focusing on increasing the bankability of the vehicles to help the ecosystem develop around on the financing and the other important aspects for increasing the deployment and adoption of these vehicles. Thanks. Happy to be a part of this summit.
Hey, this is Rohan Rao. I'm the program manager at WRI-India, looking after the electrification of freight work for WRI-India.
Good morning all. This is Sharvari Patki. I head program for EV charging in WRI-India.
Hi, good morning everyone. Amitabh, I'm the co-founder, CEO of Altigreen. We are again a last mile company. We make vehicles. We've pivoted a few times from being a hybrid drivetrain company to an EV drivetrain company to now a vehicle company. Been in the space for 9 years. Fortunate to have raised around earlier this year, about 300 crores. Helps us scale. So we are going to be in about 40 cities by the end of the year. Production capacities of about 40,000 vehicles a year. So that's the plan right now. We're focused on 3-wheelers as we speak, though we do have expertise in 2-wheelers and 4-wheelers as well, which we've demonstrated at auto expos, etc. When we get there, we'll see. But for now, great to be part of the really august gathering here today. Thanks.
Hi everyone. My name is Dave Arora. I'm the co-founder at Alt Mobility, and we're essentially a team of technologists and sustainability entrepreneurs. We all co-founders had prior experience in running a venture in solar PV, where we were trying to bring in access to finance for distributed solar in India, and now we're kind of changing our thesis to look at the EV space and how we can catalyze access to finance for electric vehicles. Specifically in the commercial fleet space, we look at LCVs and 2-wheelers, and we're essentially looking at ourselves as a EV leasing and lifecycle management platform, combining our expertise in finance plus tech and looking at how we can bring in more access to low-cost capital to the sector. And thanks to WRI for hosting this event. I think it's a very diverse group of stakeholders, and I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, I'm Kriti. I'm a program manager with WRI India, working with the electric freight team. I also also request Vikrant to please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello all, good morning. I am Vikrant Vaidya. I am a senior partner and I lead the EV systems engineering group in P-Manifold. We are into our 13th year of strategic consulting in clean energy as well as e-mobility space. We also have a academy as a group of part of our group of companies which is working on upskilling for e-mobility. And really glad to be here, some familiar faces, and apologies I couldn't be there in person, but looking forward to this discussion.
I don't know if Ruchir, you are able to, yeah, Ruchir, over to you.
Hey, hi, thanks Pawan and whole WRI team. It's really pleasure to be part of this wonderful occasion. Sorry about not able to join in person, but I see many known faces around. Last I was just quickly recalling Amitabh, you are there, and a couple of other folks. Great, thank you. I work for Shakti in the capacity of advisor for electric mobility initiatives. And what we look at it, all possible ways and means, working closely with champions like Pawan, his team, WRI, and many other partners to make the intervention right in terms of transitioning those vehicle segment and vehicle categories faster, which are key in terms of making highest level of pollutions. Thank you. Over to you, Pawan.
Thank you everyone for giving a brief introduction about yourself and your company. So I think we can start the discussion now. So initially we can just say that the freight sector is generally a commodity driven based sector, and therefore there's a diverse requirement, right? Based on distinct payloads, there is a different body structure required, what's the axle type, and all of those sorts, right? So the question that we want to put to Dr. Amita will come from you and then move around the table is how challenging do you think is to manufacture for an e-freight or a commercial sort of segment well compared to a personal sort of vehicles, and that are competitive with the internal combustion engine models for the different mode segments?
So short answer, very, very difficult. I think diesel's been around for 100 years. I think they've done an amazing job in terms of the evolution of the vehicle to reach a place where it can take care of all the abuse that happens. I'm talking specifically about India and the emerging markets of South Asia, Africa, South America. Abuse is rampant, and the abuse is not necessarily through drivers, but in terms of driving practices or in terms of overloading, but also in terms of environmental environmental problems, road conditions, temperatures, all those kinds of things. So I think if EVs have to be made, they have to be made competitive to what exists on the road today. We cannot come out with a vehicle, say that this is very good for the planet, and please spend 100% more, twice the cost. There are vehicles that cost 5 times more and 1/5 the performance. I think we have to get to a place where we are in a position to say that we're not going to be talking about compromise when it comes to EVs. They have to be better than the existing technologies, and to make that, in our experience, and maybe we are slow, but it took us 9 years to get here. I think most EV programs of large companies, do take a lot of time. And the time is not just to design a vehicle or to build the first prototype, but the amount of testing it requires and the components that need to be made for it. So it's not just the mechanical components, but the electrical components. They have to be designed, developed, fabricated, manufactured, tested, type approved, everything for this geography. And that is not something that I believe, I don't come from this industry, I'm a computer science guy. And I'm waiting for the time when software will be the differentiator in these vehicles. I'm just hoping and waiting that we get there very soon. But until then, just saying that this motor works very well in a different geography and it will work in India, and that geography might be a very, very developed geography, and to expect it to work here may not necessarily be the case, whether it is in terms of price or in performance altogether. And I think that is where a lot of work needs to be done. It's been several years of working for us, including working for very large OEMs. So we understand the quality needs that need to go in, starting from design all the way. I don't know, it seems to be a very long answer, but it is very, very difficult. And I'm hoping that more and more EV companies are coming about that are actually looking at good designs, good engineering of different components. And I think overall the ecosystem is only getting better and better as we speak.
Well, I just had a follow-up question, and just to this group also, is we have seen that we have been able to crack buses, right? And I think we are talking about hard usage there. I also want to understand if you can just a little bit differentiate that, why is it so difficult in the MCV or HCV segment when we are able to crack on buses? I think that's one thing, if I can ask any of these speakers to really think about that. And also we know that models exist. It's not that models don't exist around the world, right? We have seen there are EV truck corridors globally right now, where they even run like trams. In Germany, one of the corridors is designed like that. Is it only the cost parity issue that we are talking about here, or are we also talking about building a low-cost solution for our needs, given that probably we are running BS1, BS2 trucks, average age of trucks, are we talking about 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, we don't know. So I think it will be good also to bring those little detailed perspectives if possible. Thank you.
I mean, if anyone cares to take it, and I think go around the room. I think Raghavendra has, yeah, please.
Also, there's been a message that the volume is not being heard, so if you all can keep the mic little closer. We are not able to see the video. What happened?
I mean, your question was specifically, focusing on HCVs and where models have worked on the bus segments, right? I mean, coming to the HCV segment, one especially on the freight side of things. On the long haul, the bottom line is the road long haul electrified vehicles, will never be able to compete with railways, for example, right? Railways by far are the most cost efficient and energy efficient. But coming to the first mile or last mile, whichever you want to look at it, where railways cannot reach that region, even in the heavy duty vehicles, there is a substantial opportunity where we can, technology is there. Technology is there, have started, being deployed in India. And some of these, let's say the first mile segment, which is typically the ports, are the most ideal environment, even compared to, let's say, an urban city environment, right? Let's say, environment within port, it's a substantial opportunity, more than 1 lakh trucks, market in India itself. It's a very, very flat terrain. You don't have to cross more than 15 kilometer speeds. It's the most ideal environment that we can think about. There's no, cross merger of other traffic getting involved. Technology is available, but where buses succeeded is obviously the financial incentive, the government support that was there. Within the bus segment, the end customer is the government. And some of the schemes that have been deployed, evolved, like FAME, are already available for bus segments. If we bring those kind of incentives for the freight segment and include heavy duty trucks, for example, I'm certainly sure OEMs will also come forward to spend more R&D on that and then start deploying on this. Yeah. That's a one. There are many other.
Yeah. Supratim and Nakul, if you guys could
I think Jayant wanted to say something.
So SCV as a segment, we need to understand, is something which was given birth to by a Tata Ace. So originally speaking, this segment never existed, and we only had few electric few normal conventional three-wheelers which have been there in the cargo space. But the segment really took off with the launch of the original Tata Ace way back in 2000. So we need to understand this thing, that this segment is a highly cost-sensitive segment. So here, the price parity with the diesel vehicles is already expected out of the electric vehicle OEMs. So this sorts of a challenge is not existing in the bus segment, because when we talk about the electric bus, then the costing of an electric bus would be in the range of $80,000 to $100,000, which is near about 2x the costing of a normal diesel bus. So the challenge here for OEMs is to make a durable, reliable, and a competitive vehicle which can replace a diesel vehicle at a price point of a diesel vehicle. So this calls for out-of-the-box solutions. And as Amitabh rightly pointed out, that the vehicles which are required here need to be as durable as a diesel vehicle and need to be better than a diesel vehicle. And the geography plays a very important role here, because the solutions which have come from the West, or the technologies which have come from the West for the components of EVs, those technologies are not a copy-paste on the Indian geography. So Indian geography is very different, and to cater to these challenges, the solution needs to be customized, tested, tried out, and it also needs to stand the test of the time. It needs to stand the aging also, so for it to become more durable. Thanks.
One more additional point, question to Mr. Supratim. As he mentioned, Tata Ace has actually changed the landscape, and we have recently seen EV equivalent getting launched, but as per study, 60% of EVs are in sub 1 ton category. Do you think in future we will see the similar success in MCV, LCV on that replication model? And what are the challenges and opportunities?
Hello. Yes, definitely. I think, as you know, they were saying, the technology kind of exists for heavier vehicles as well, and we can definitely move out of the LCV space and move into MCV and HCV and maybe ultra high load vehicles as well. The only problem here is that with the advent of electric vehicle, there has been a shift in the overall economic trend. I mean, now revenue making for an OEM doesn't seem like that it will stick to selling the vehicle on day one and get the revenue from there. The revenue making will happen over over the entire life cycle of the product. So that's how the entire business model has to evolve, because it doesn't seem realistic at this point that cost parity on day one for selling the vehicle will come anytime soon between EV vehicles and diesel vehicles, whatever be the segment. I mean, that I don't think that is going to happen anytime soon. Probably technology, advancement will happen over the next decade when we might hit cost parity, but till then, I think monetizing over the entire product life cycle has to be looked at. But for different segments of the vehicle, like MCV, HCV, technologies exist. Just people have to, work on as Amitabh was saying, I mean, build out a reliable product architecture, make the vehicle stand in comparison to the diesel vehicle. I mean, be robust, deliver on the specification that the vehicle is built for. That is where I think we are lacking a bit. It's mostly about doing the right product development.
Is it about product development, or you see is the market ready? I'm talking more from the demand side, not from the supply side, because I think the whole discussion is focused more from the supply. That would be, but for example, is there a willingness to switch to electric from your customers? I understand, there may be some of these delivery companies which may be interested, given that, they have their net zero commitments internally. But for example, what about a cement industry? What about an agricultural, the support industry, which is doing all this transport? Given that it's so fragmented, I also want to understand from this group, for us, I think it will be important, what is the incentive for them to move?
No, I'll just, say a couple of sentences on that.
Resistance in the system itself, because one side is they're talking about technology, which is fine, but what is the incentive for us to switch if we're comfortable with, very good product in the market? They're saying 100 years, things have been done excellent, so why should we even switch? Forget the climate story for a moment.
Yes, definitely. So there is resistance, I'm sure. I mean, not everyone is looking to switch to electric today. But I think there are, I mean, the resistance that is there can be categorized under two, buckets. One is they don't think that electric vehicle can deliver on the abuse that the vehicle has to take, and which is a product design problem, which is a technology problem, which is a quality problem. So that's where product development comes in. The other thing is the cost of the vehicle on day one. That has to be solved through more innovative business model and business proposition to the customer. I don't think selling the vehicle on day one at 2x the price will solve this issue, because that price is not going to come down. But it has to be monetized over the entire lifetime through services, through whatever. I mean, depends on what type of product we are developing actually. So these are the two main resistances. I'm not saying that it's solvable today, but yeah.
So I think it'll be use case driven. I think there's no universal solution that tomorrow, you switch the, you turn the switch on and, everything gets connected to electric. You can very easily see that in three-wheeler space at least, people don't have a problem today of switching over to this, especially in the B2B space. And I am certain that by the end of the year, you will start seeing B2C also with a fairly large footprint in the B2C side, even if you don't consider the e-rickshaws, the 2 million e-rickshaws that are already out there. So realize that over whatever 30, 40 years that we've been selling three-wheelers, we've sold about 15 million of them on Indian roads. And in the last 6 or 7 years, there have been 2 million e-rickshaws that have been sold by 463 odd manufacturers, right, across India. They've figured out how to charge it. Not everyone is stealing electricity. Trust me, I have done enough investigation. Personally, I have traveled to 4 different states with a gamcha around my shoulders just to ask people how this works. So I think different use cases will make electric penetration higher. I think there's a lot of work being done on the PLI side. Reliance is an investor. I know that there are big plans in coming out with cells, which are about 40% of the cost of the vehicle. Cells that will be made for India, in India, and bring the cost down substantially. When large investors show up, they try to bring the price down substantially, and that will make sure that the price parity comes. I mean, and to answer Supratim's question also, there will be, you're absolutely right, there will be financing models that will evolve. So as an OEM, I will always get my money upfront. Now, how it goes to the customer, there's a huge TCO benefit that we are seeing in this segment. And because of that TCO segment, even if subsidies were to reduce or go away in different segments, the TCO benefit still is so substantial that even during the life of the vehicle, and if you were to replace batteries, I think you still see a positive gain in all of this, which is why I think every segment, if the vehicle was engineered properly and people had that confidence that it works in my use case and it will take the abuse in my use case, I have a feeling a lot more people will switch over. I think all these stories of, catching fires and those kind of things, I think they do have a setback. People start thinking a little bit. I think at some point this will go away. I think it's early days for EVs right now, is my feeling.
Can I just... Right, so I completely agree with Amitabh for the fact that net-net, it finally boils down to the TCO. Today we see a very positive case study for three-wheelers, which on a commercial basis makes a huge sense. One for the principal, the e-com, so many other sectors which you just mentioned, companies. We at Magenta Mobility partner today with a lot of FMCG companies, food delivery companies, who see a positive case on a three-wheeler. TCOs are extremely positive. The move towards the medium to the larger commercial segment, I think one key differentiator which we need to mitigate before, so these are low-hanging fruits. Last mile has been the first adopter. We still see, as an operator's standpoint of view, somebody who runs these fleets with principal companies like Amazon, the big baskets, who are looking to deliver products in 15 minutes, who are looking at a 99.98% customer service stat scores. We as operators need reliable vehicles, right? So in controlled environments, which are last mile distribution operations, which we currently do, we still struggle with vehicle reliability, vehicle downtimes, and that significantly impact my profitability. They take a big share of on my margins, honestly. So talks about creating larger vehicles, which can move city to city and states to states. I'm sure a large part of ecosystem play has to still come into play. Financing is a big role. Huge charging, capex cost, infrastructure development needs to come. But I think reliability still has a long way to go where, as an operator, and I say this because 80% of the freight commercial operators are single or two vehicle owners. To them, if they want to put their money, they need easy financing. They need a vehicle which is reliable to say, okay, I'm not gonna stuck midway with a zero charge with the consignments in my truck to be delivered with Amazon sitting on my head. So reliability, I think, will be a key before we can even talk about these bigger objectives to reach up there.
Oh, you want to go first?
No. You all are from the other side of it, and I'm on the other side. I have a different thought process in the whole.
Perfect. I'll keep it short, I know. So we've spoken on technology, we've spoken on TCOs, we've spoken on reliability, all of it. I think one of the aspects that we need to consider is also the risk appetite, right? The HCVs, MCVs, etc. These cannot be a switch. They have to be a transition, right? Because there's a larger risk involved in transitioning to. There's a lot more to go. As Rohit has already told, there's this reliability of the vehicle. Nobody has seen the complete life cycle of the vehicle till now. I have not, right? We've been operating for a couple of years now, not 7 years. We have warranties, everything, buybacks, etc., but not seen the complete life cycle. There's a huge risk involved when it comes to the longer distance, heavier vehicles. That's one aspect other than the technology, commercials, reliability is risk. One more point I'd want to also emphasize is what Raghavendra has told is the rail transportation, or the mode of rail is the best and the most competitive in this segment. I think there are two rail corridors, if I'm not wrong. Right. One is the east, which is about 1,900 kilometers. One is the west, which is about 1,600 odd kilometers. Just imagining electrifying this whole thing for your trucks and your vehicles, right? It's going to be a huge capex investment. It's not a private only play. It also requires equal amount of government. The risk appetite is something which overtakes everything else other than the technologies, and because there's a lot more to this.
Satish, also please bring the Gati Shakti context to this now that Daryl has mentioned about the two corridors.
I think Daryl talked about railways, but let me bring to you all another aspect, the inland waterways. That's the least utilized in the country today. It's less than 1%. We've got only 2 national waterways sort of it. I'll come to the Gati Shakti, but look at from our standpoint is whether you bring the cargo by diesel, water, air, ocean, really does not matter for me. Whether my cargo is reached from point A to point B really matters to me, because my end customer will say, "Aap kahin se bhi lao, kidhar se bhi lao, but mujhe maal time se chahiye." That's the standard answer that we get. So, because I'm bringing this point out because we are not against at any point of time using electrical at all. Okay, because I've been in the industry for long, and I can tell you one thing: our 2 biggest components which kill us today as India is, one is fuel. Dollar is at 79. So and this is not going to come down in India. Dollar, I had predicted, will touch 84 in one of my articles, because there are 2 things that happen in our country. One, the women will continue to buy gold. They will not stop. We will have cars which will be driven by petrol till at least a few more years till we become electrical. 3, our children are not going to only study in India, but they will study overseas, which means you will have to do dollar remittances of $20,000, $30,000. So the dollar will continue to be there. So we have to address it from a both point. One is decarbonization and sustainability angle, but also is that if you don't bring down the overall cost of freight, the common man's affordability of products will become another issue, which we have to really look at it. Because one is, whatever we do, we have to keep in mind the end customer is equally important. Because that, if we don't keep that in mind, then we have other problems that come in. So why I'm bringing these things to light is that today India's biggest problem as far as freight is concerned is no standardization. What I mean by standardization is that today if I operate in Germany, I can drive a 40-foot trailer through lanes and bylanes and offload a cargo using a palletized cargo. So here we believe that our labor is cheap, so we dump everything into the loose trucks and try and do. So one, unless you want to get into EV space, the biggest exim cargo traffic is 20 feet and a 40-foot container. If that can be addressed, because that doesn't need long haul all the time. It goes from the port to the nearest factory as one example, or from an ICD to a nearest sort of it. You're not doing the long haul. Within ICD Tughlaqabad in Delhi, you do 40,000 containers in a month. So if you look at only the ICDs in Chennai, it constitutes to 40 ICDs today, which means they are called inland container depot, where the containers move through electrical trains. There is double stacking happening between ICD partly in close to Gurgaon to Mundra port. So we are not saying electrification is not happening, because that's a wrong thing that we sometimes presume. But what is important is how do you connect that last bit of it between using electric? Because within the port today, why do you use diesel at all? Because you have enough electricity in the port. You have enough EV points within the port. Because why I'm making this point is, a lot of you think that we don't have electrification points. The reefer trucks that we use to store pharma and seafood, we need electrification. So we already have a three-way concept where we put one plug and typical Indian thing, usko aur do jod do. We have been doing it. So tomorrow if someone says you don't have an EV point today, Indians are smart, जुगाड़ करेगा ना, उसको और एक दो तार जोड़ देगा, अगर fuse उड़ जाएगा तो उसको और मोटा कर देगा. So I think we are good in terms of getting the EV station. I'm not even looking from a point that today if you go and tell everyone, I'll pay you certain amount and you create EV charging points. It's like the mobile ATM. When we started ATM, banks did not have ATM points. Na? Today you go to a village in Kakinada or somewhere, I find an ATM. The initial stage will be difficult. I think what we all need to understand is anything in life when you start will be difficult. We all started our life, we started with some difficulty. We reached so far. The same example comes for us from the freight forwarding industry. The largest global freight forwarder today constitutes only 2% of the market share. That clearly, and his size is $24 billion. If a $24 billion company in the freight space controls only 2% or 1%, in the trucking sphere, what I have come to know is close to 80 to 90% of the trucks are owned from one state in the country. And that's Haryana. Now, if you don't address that point at Haryana, then when you address it to someone like me who controls 3,000 trucks, we are not addressing the issue. So I wanted to bring a little different context to the whole thing so that if we can help you in any way, we are more than happy to do that, because I represent a lot of organizations like the ECOG Forum of India, the FTCCI, on many of the governing bodies. We find that the other difficult point that comes as far as the Indian drivers are the most, I don't know which way to tell, because I've lived in Africa, I lived in the disrespected people. They're not even competent enough to know what is pollution, and today their livelihood is different. Whereas if you look at someone in South Africa, where I lived for 4 years, the driver sits on the same boardroom meeting because he's multitasking. He understands what is pollution, why he should be doing that. I think to get the EV point of view, it is important that you educate the buyers, you educate the drivers, you do more of these. I'm glad if WRI wants to do more workshops in other cities, we will volunteer as Viz with you to drive this. Because if unless the discussion comes up, people will not know what is the benefit. And so these are some of the points, Pawan, if you want me to touch on the last of PM Gati Shakti. See, why PM Gati Shakti came, or it's not whether Modi bought it or anyone bought it. If you all know, I'm part of it, and I can tell you one thing is that today when the telecom digs one road, tomorrow the PWC or the municipality comes and digs the same road. Then the government puts one more tender and says, okay, now to close these holes, we'll get one more tender. Then the third government comes and then finds another way of saying, now we have to put optical fiber, so you also dig on it. What PM Gati Shakti does is that it basically is putting 7 to 8 ministries together, and you should look at the technology they are using. It's mind-boggling. It tells you under what tree is located in which place. It tells you which drain pipe is there where, and it can give you complete visibility. And it's saying is that before you all do any digging, look at what is there at where place and dig at the right places. Because today after digging of a few holes, we find, "Arey galat jagah to hum khod diya abhi." Sort of it. So I think PM Gati Shakti program is an amazing program. From a point of view is to get all the ministries together, to take inputs from stakeholders like everyone. It also helps you in terms of helping you do the skill development. Because the biggest challenge today in the freight market for all of you to understand, we don't have MBAs. I probably will be one among those 1% who puts on a tie and a suit. We are loaders, boss. We didn't know anything called supply chain. Today, in COVID, all of you understood that there is something called supply chain. Supply chain was not a subject which, when I came into the industry, people told me you came into the wrong industry. Why I'm saying that is that the more educated people you have, the productivity and efficiencies are likely to go up, because the word productivity a driver may not know. Whereas in trucking, if you are having this return load problem today, you can only fix it by using technology, and which we are doing, and we are reaping benefits of it, is that we are able to identify in which market what loads need immediate conversion. And that's what I was sharing with Pawan, is that a combination of skilling, a combination of technology, a combination of standardization of your transportation in terms of 20s and 40s, then palletization. That means the truck generally, if it has to be, reefer truck has to be kept, and the issue of not being able to charge. But if you're able to offload it fast, then you don't need to worry too much of recharging. Then in the reefer truck sphere, what we should do, Pawan, is that there's a lot of emission happens in reefer trucks, because you're using compressors and rest of them for the cooling. That's where you should use PCM technology. Phase change material, where you don't use power, you charge it at a point and it lasts for 270 hours. So I'm working on a project for that. I was the one who bought PCM in terms of pharma transportation. I've been a part of the vaccine distribution in the country. We don't use any power at all. It's a water-based solution, but the temperature of -20, 228 lasts for 270 hours at ambient temperature. Now there is high sustainable. Okay, but to charge them, we have to find other ways to do it. There is a little of carbon emission that happens. But I think these are areas which put together could probably be the path ahead if all stakeholders can work together.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Satish. I just want to bring Mr. Vikrant Vaidya, who's joining us online, because I think Mr. Satish made a very good point about skill development, and also the previous discussions about the reliability, the basic appetite for taking this risk in India. So, Mr. Vikrant, if you're able to hear us, I just want to ask you about the whole conversation and your thoughts into it, and also if we can provide a bit more technical insights into the different types of torque delivery, the gradability issues that the EV freight models will encounter in the country, and how to optimize it, the different duty cycles that we see, right? So I would try to get your insights, one about the skill development part, and of course about the technical aspects of the development of these freight models itself.
Sure. Thanks, Rohan. So I'll start with the second one first, where I've been hearing very interesting discussion around a lot of points have been brought in, and going back to what Pawan started, that why, despite having cracked bus to a certain extent, why we haven't been cracking this sector, and all very good points in terms of reliability, in terms of financing. Just to add to the reliability thing, the way IC engine trucks are serviced, you can go to anyone. You can go to anyone roadside, you will have a shack, and he will service your vehicle, he will get it running. We do not have that kind of confidence, or rather a trucker will not have that type of confidence in electric truck today, right? So that's another thing, thinking from a person who would buy or operate a truck would be wary of. And that's not something which he can derive confidence out of a e-bus ecosystem. E-buses are relatively in a closed environment. Right now, most of the deployments have been intra-city. There have been some intercity, but still mostly intra-city. And there are workshops, there are AMCs, plus there are workshops owned by the STUs or owned by the respective depots who do the maintenance, and they can actually do even a rescue mission if required. But nothing of that sort is right now feasible. So there is a lot of that work needs to be done, where you have that kind of ecosystem. I'm not saying you would go to all the practices that we can do away with even in IC engines, where you see patchwork being done things put together somehow, welded drive shafts running around. No. But what I am getting to is there should be a support. Otherwise, anyone as a trucker, how would he entrust his livelihood to something which, if breaks down somewhere, the only way to fix right now, the only way to fix an electric vehicle, believe me, is to replace. Motor fails, replace the motor, get the vehicle going, then worry about it later. That's not how IC engines are repaired, right? You get liners being repaired, roadside piston rings being put in, bearings being changed, clutch plates are, they become very smooth. They are again grounded and they are again sanded to get the grip. Yeah. So those kind of things are also what the electrification will fight against, or will have to fight against. Very few organized people are there in this sector as well. So we do see a lot of them going to AMCs, but again, there are a lot of 1, 2, 3 truck owners, the small fleet owners as we call them, who are not into that, and they actually depend on this ecosystem to have their trucks running. And thirdly, any trucker will not believe any success story other than a fellow trucker success story. So we have to create those. We may start with small. Somebody talked about those low-hanging fruits. We have to start small, get the confidence of few truckers, and then others will believe them, or they themselves will think of extending the range from very short range, medium range, long range. And of course, there has to be the technology to support that. We talked about, I mean, briefly talked about hydrogen economy. That's something which essentially isn't very different from electric. You have done half of the stuff already. The hydrogen, especially the hydrogen fuel cell, what they are going to do is produce electricity. And that electricity is eventually going through a battery to a motor and driving the wheel. So you already have a motor, you already have a battery in electric truck. You remove a bigger battery, you put in a small battery, you put in the fuel cells and the hydrogen tank to extend your range. So technology wise, I think a lot of options are available. What is required, and believe me, when I spoke to the OEMs, they are waiting for the demand, and the demand side is waiting for the product. So somewhere that impasse has to be broken. Coming to upskilling, I would link back to what I said earlier about the service network. The support network has to be there. So that would actually require a lot of skilling. We talk about, of course, reskilling the product development teams, coming up with reliable products in EV space. There is a big challenge in product development because traditionally OEMs owned engine designs. Now they are not. The motors are bought and they do not understand it to that depth. So of course it is there, but along with it, what is required is this reassuring ecosystem for people to actually adopt it. Believe me, even if we do, we have been slowly, in personal mobility, we have been slowly growing up to this concept of reliability as a country, which is absolutely demanded in the Western world, but we do not, right? We get away making advertisements of having service stations everywhere. So imagine this is for personal mobility, what it would be for a freight where the trucks go through areas where there is no one, there is nothing. We may go out in personal mobility for adventure, but that's their livelihood and they do not have an option. So this ecosystem definitely needs to be developed, both in terms of the technical support as well as the manpower to actually do this, so that the trucks are having that support, and then you would get mass adoption. Till then, we would see mostly these some of these use cases which are low hanging, which are in a controlled environment, or which are accessible from the big cities, being the hubs of support, and that's where we have to create those success stories.
I just wanted to check, Ruchir, if you had any questions, if you're still with us online.
Yeah. Yeah. Pawan very much in there, and very interesting point what I see Vikrant just you covered. So certainly the most important aspect which I think a couple of other friends have also covered is the way the freight vehicles move. That as a use case is absolutely different. Now freight, it includes starting from I would say medium and heavy duty commercial vehicle, because up to LCV, you still find they pass through certain arrangements where there are options of, uh, addressing their anxiety, especially in terms of if there is some issue, somebody will be able to reach out and address. And that's what really gets absolutely disconnected when you start climbing up towards heavy duty. And we have been on various forums talking about it, and looks like between what I think just now, if I heard correctly from Vikrant, you have OEM, they have a platform level development all done, right? And as far as whole of product, architecture, they have something at least to offer, right? And they do understand the use case importance, especially in freight, because the key customer for them are not individuals. They are the fleet owners, and India is totally different, hardly having 5 trucks, they are the fleet owners. And for them, huge hit on the customer side in terms of taking every rupee out from them. And on the other side, they don't have cash to pay and buy a front vehicle. So also the financing becomes the biggest another chunk, right? Uh, Today, if they have to go and buy a diesel one, they have options of even second hand, which is used one. They have option of even buying new at their doorstep with number of people lined up with giving them a kind of a near to free, just run my vehicle, right? Those kind of schemes there. Where is that for EV? Same OEM, if it brings a EV, I don't see many of OEMs have a financing arm, even starting from two-wheeler onwards. Do they offer that? I don't think so. That's on the same terms like ICE engine, right? So the challenges are two places. One, how do we really address the financing of it? And much more is in terms of addressing the type of skilling. Here, skilling is not only to skill the skilled segment, but all three: unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled segment, all three segments. And most important is the bottom two. And the last one is unskilled workforce. The way the mechanical parts are moved, the mechanical parts are taken for repair, like a couple of, I think, a few friends have addressed that. Exactly different than the electric stuff. The way the environment to keep them even in their stores, the mechanical parts, many of them just lying on the wooden bench, right? That cannot be the case for many of the electronics part. The precision in electronics adjustment requires a huge set of machines, diagnostics tools, which is not going to be possible. Even we see even our present time high-end vehicles, even ICE engine vehicles, they are not easy for repair beyond certain level. But overall, this anxiety is so big, especially for the business guys who are like our freight, fleet owners. For them, it's really important, and especially when considering they are very small, they don't have a lot of money to really take care of any of this eventuality. If they are not able to manage, the whole of their business is gone. So I just want to really re-emphasize on that point. Thank you. Sorry, in between I was missing on and off. My apologies, have 2 calls to manage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vikrant, and thank you so much, Mr. Rusher. So Vikrant sir has got 2 important points. One is in ICE vehicle, we have kit-off parts method. We can literally change from liner to a small part individually. Probably if we can use that similar lines in EV, that might help us. And then also it might help in the skilling part of. After having a technical discussion, we wish to drive little bit towards the policy, and we wish to start with you, Mr. Jayan. We have seen at this point of time, FAME has very limited support for commercial fleet. So how do you think policy levers can be utilized to drive electrification of freight?
So policy plays a very important role in incentivizing businesses. Businesses are always looking for more avenues
to make profit. So in India, everyone has an entrepreneurial mindset. You don't need to tell the person to go and invest into something. He would do it himself the moment he sees that he is able to make money out of it and earn profit out of it. So people are hunting for opportunities. So everyone is talking about the ecosystem and the charging infrastructure which needs to come up. So the best way to incentivize the investment on chargers could be to have an open grid system. We could have a cloud grid system in which we could incentivize people and incentivize vehicle to grid, grid to vehicle transition of electricity. So in this architecture, the conventional wheeling charges, the transmission charges, and all these things need to be waived off. And people need to be incentivized in setting up renewable energy power plants, solar power plants. And this transition from vehicle to grid would also help in stabilizing the electricity grid, which people are also doubting that would be destabilized with more electric vehicles to come in. On the policy front, I would also like to draw attention to the policies which are there or the laws which are there right now for vehicle type approvals and the conventional vehicle testing norms. So one of a very, very relevant example which I can take is everyone is talking about installation of charging infrastructure. But as an OEM, I faced a very peculiar problem. And I think Rohit sitting here also was very helpful for us to solve that problem. We wanted to implement this DC001 charging facility on our vehicle. I wasn't able to find the standard which was written down by BIS. BIS hasn't given the complete standard itself which I can code onto my vehicle to enable it to be charged on a DC001 charging station. I had to buy a 10,000 rupee Chinese document to actually implement the code of that DC001 charging station onto my vehicle and then make my vehicle compatible with DC001 charging. I think to enable this thing, it should be open source code which is available and more OEMs will adopt it. And if more OEMs are adopting it, the investment for charging infrastructure setup providers will become viable. But this is the entry-level gap which no one is talking about. Companies, the charger OEM companies like Delta, Okaya, and all these companies, they also don't have the source code of this document for this thing. Rohit, I would be very happy if you can add on to this.
No, I just wanted to come in 1 second, and I had two specific questions from policy which I wanted to extend Sharvari. What Sharvari asked. One is, what year specifically do you think would electrification into MCV and HCV segment make sense if that has to happen in India? Are we saying that it's going to happen in 2025? Is it 2030? Or I just want to get a feel from this room, like literally a poll also, that where is the electrification journey happening? And also, if you can just tell us what are the two big policy measures you think would really support electrification of the fleet? Because I think it need not be just the incentives and subsidies, right? It also could be the carrot and stick approach. Is there a mandate in electrification? I think there are various ways to look at it. So in the next 5-10 minutes before we do we break out, if we can really think along those two lines, that would be also good to hear. Nakul, I haven't also heard from you, but Satish, why don't we start with you quickly? Target year of electrification, LCV we are seeing, it's happening. SCV we are seeing, it's happening. But MCV, HCV, what do you feel? How is the market going to pick up? And then two strong policy measures, whether it's incentive for electrification or disincentive for ICE, what will work? And I'm not saying that it has to happen tomorrow, but also it helps us understand that what is the direction or the roadmap for the freight electrification.
See, to give you a date and time is not difficult for a reason is that we know that if you can't say tomorrow. It will be an horizon of 5 to 7 years. For a reason out is that even when government in Delhi came on the pollution, they said the diesel vehicles have a certain life and they moved to CNG. And the private cars also had that 10 years document in the rest of them. So I'm going by that logic also is that You can't phase out all the trucks and say everything has to be replaced. So you'll have a combination of some new ones coming in immediately. Why today someone like us has been struggling, and why for the first time ever that an Indian logistics company is going global? You all need to understand this, from the independence time, the logistics company's headquarters globally have either been Germany or US. Whereas, where is the market? The market is either China or India, the emerging markets. Because the governments did not back us up. Because whatever money is come into the trucking industry, freight forwarding industry, is our hard-earned money which we have been putting into this industry. There's not one government company. The biggest government company, Shipping Corporation, does not even figure out today. And you're saying shipping is the biggest problem. So if you're making a policy, make a policy which supports the Indian carriers, the Indian freight forwarding companies, and allow us to get some loans from the bank. Because the last 30 years, no one gave us loan to even buy trucks. So where are we talking about even some incentive or a policy really beginning is that the fundamental right is not given. If you are going for a housing loan, you're getting it, but if I'm doing a business for logistics, you're not ready to give me a loan. So how illogical is the whole thing is that you are saying a salaried employee working for me can get a loan, but I as a company can't get a loan. And I will get a loan if I give you a huge collateral. So first and foremost is that the trucking industry has to be really incentivized in terms of saying is that they should allow more large players to come in and encourage them to come. Because for large players to come, what you need also is that where do you have parking spaces? Today, please understand the real estate cost. Tomorrow, if you do even charging points, and in the night, aircrafts have a parking bay. Where is the parking bay for the drivers today? The dabas, the roadside. The first thing is you address that which is there in the other part of the world is that if people are ready to bring in 5,000 trucks, give us space to park them, now we'll charge them. Ultimately, then we'll reach out to all of you. First fundamental is not there is that even if you bring it and in say, we will run it in the Europe model of from one location to other, ETA Delhi, 6:40 in the evening, we will arrive at Jaipur 4 hours from there, we will offload the cargo, we will hit Ahmedabad by so and so time. I can do that in Europe, which is why there's a company called Volta Trucks, which tied up with one of the companies already. It's not that it does not exist, it's just that I think the willpower by the government to allow this freight corridors to happen. On the freight corridors, you should tell the driver's boss, you can't stop anywhere. You have to run at an 80 kilometer speed, 60 kilometer speed, the way it has to run, and you can only stop at these particular places. Once you do that, then you don't have this worry of saying, you know, how efficient will it be? You know you have to cover in 10 hours, say 350 or 400 kilometers, and then you can charge. So I think the policy should be involving all stakeholders, Pawan, because today all policies are done listening to 4 or 5 people who are not even experienced in it, first thing. 2 is the end user has to be taken into really important, because we don't even get a chance in the past to pass on this message, and after that we are paying the penalty sort of it. I think these are important things. I have told you 5 to 7 years is a horizon. Government has to look at it in terms of really getting large players sort of it. Then if we can do all these things, then I think it's not too far from getting to that dream of what we want to achieve. And because 40% of your emissions will come from trucking anyhow. There's no denial about it. And if you change any number of cars and put 2-wheelers, are we going to bring it down? We're not going to bring it down. And that is the reality sort of it. 2, there are a lot of good cases which are there in other parts of the world, which we can copy. What is wrong in copying some other model from Europe or somewhere in the hub and spoke concept and making it more efficient? Because you're talking about e-freight from a standpoint of really, we don't have the hub and spoke concept so efficiently even in the country as of now. Because your Nagpur, your Madhya Pradesh, which are landlocked, really need to be the hubs for vehicles to transfer and then get your hubs active and incentivize people to use them, which are freely available. I'm not saying give me land in Delhi. I'm not at all saying that, because that's being unreasonable. I'm saying give me land where the price itself is not so high and it is underutilized. No?
experts envision for our light, heavy, and medium commercial vehicle electrification? Please.
Sure. I think from a financing perspective, there's already been a lot of talk about priority sector lending. Status for financing of EVs, I think that's going to definitely be of great help in terms of loosening up interest from lenders to come in and participate in this space. And what we're increasingly seeing with consistent conversations we're having with lenders on the ground, which I'll also speak about in a bit, is also that even today, as penetration grows, we're still seeing more and more version from lenders to come in and participate in this space. A few have tried, but it's happening at a very, very slow pace. So a lot of support from policy in the form of PSL, interest subvention schemes, and so on, would certainly be helpful in unlocking this access to finance.
Can we pull out the chat? I think Mr. Sudhendu, someone asked a question. Let's see what they've asked. Just go to the chat. Sudhendu Mishra. I would request you use mic. Sudhendu Mishra, can you just say if you have any question or anything you wanted to comment? Otherwise, we can. Dave, did you want to add anything else, or? So, going back, I did hear about the PSL, the subvention scheme. But do you see any target date that, where we'll see a journey where the electrification of the freight sector would really kick off?
So from a supply, as I talk demand and supply perspective, I think from a supply perspective, we have vehicles or products still under, kind of R&D stage. I think the product itself is not ready. The next step is when the product is ready, does it have a product market fit with respect to it being able to meet the price point? That's the second biggest consideration. And I think from a demand perspective, we already have customers who are asking us, when is the next big 3.5 ton vehicle coming in? We'd want to do trials. We're very happy to kind of explore this as well because they're already seeing savings in their current business model. So from a demand perspective, I think as soon as the economic makes sense, there's a reliable vehicle that's on the ground, I think we'll be able to see an uptake. But from what I know of conversations with multiple OEMs, that development is probably still about 3 years away. Yeah. 2 to 3 years away, yeah. And, yeah.
I mean, there's no specific order. I mean, Amitabh, James, Darren, we'll just go through this. We have also not heard from you.
I'll add some quick comments on the two questions. Yeah, sure. So regarding the advent of electrification in MCVs and HCVs, what we believe is that these vehicles have much more lucrative TCO economics than even light commercial vehicles, given that in a single day they drive much more than 100, 200 or even 300 kilometers. So obviously there is one aspect of technology developing and becoming mainstream and mature for MCVs and HCVs. But whenever that happens, the adoption would be much faster. The second aspect here would be that the initial adoption would be driven by some very specific use cases where the routes and the range can be well defined. And that's where you can plan charging at the origin or at the destination itself, rather than going for altogether long haul trucking in the beginning. So yeah, so some of these considerations will impact in the initial phase drive the adoption for MCVs and HCVs. Coming to the policy and incentives, I believe that besides whatever incentives come in at the right time for vehicle sales or for vehicle suppliers, vehicle manufacturers, the incentives on the financing side and also on the charging infra would be needed for the electrification of these larger trucks, because the charging infra for these MCVs and HCVs would be much more costlier and much more complicated to put together, and will definitely need intervention from the government departments and discoms and transmission companies, because a single private entity or maybe even multiple private entities together won't be able to put together a charging infra for these larger trucks.
the two questions. The first one was, sorry, I forgot. It was about when do we have the medium and the long mile deliveries, right? It's just a speculation. I'll put a logic to it. The low-hanging fruits that we mentioned, the the e-commerce and the FMCGs, etc. Probably the electric vehicle adoption or the experiment began in 2017, right? It's been almost 5 years, and there's an adoption, there's an acceptance to this. The vehicles have been researched, developed, designed, and now I think there's a ready accepting to the last mile delivery vehicles. Going by that logic, I am aware a couple of OEMs are also working on the medium scale vehicles, and a couple of them are also experimenting the buses and the trucks, right? So probably 3-4 years from now is my answer, because electric vehicles is the future, people are aware. There's also a question on hydrogen and all of that. Considering all of it, 3 years is my answer, 4 years to be on a safer side. Policies, I think a couple of segments, I cannot be very specific though. There are a lot of diesel concessions being made by the government, right? That's the first thing. I think if you stop that, probably that may accelerate adoption of electric vehicles in the transportation business. Second is obviously the financing. The reason why I say this is there's a lot of struggle that we as an operator go through to get finance for the vehicles. They don't have the product mapped. We talk to a lot of startups, fintechs, NBFCs, which are new in this business and willing to take that risk. We need support from the government in this aspect, right? The state governments, national government, banks, etc., who need to push this financing, easier option, fast tracking this. They have the larger appetite to absorb this risk, and these are two policies from my end.
In terms of, again, timeline, honestly, the first 40-ton pure electric truck got deployed in India in 2018. And last year, 2021, India saw about, 50 odd, 55-ton vehicles got deployed, right? Now we are talking about deployment at scale. Pure electric. Now, again, as Vikrant mentioned, the question is, demand is looking towards supply and supply is looking towards demand. So there is that mismatch which needs to be addressed. In terms of policy, yes, there are dime a dozen that are required to enable rapid adoption, but at the end of the day, it's again supply chain problem that we, everyone is looking at, right? If FAME is available to the buses, and buses in terms of orders that we are looking at now, CESL 1.0, 5,000 buses to CESL 2.0, 50,000 buses. I mean, if on the bus side itself is such a huge demand within the HCV segment, where is the bandwidth for the OEMs to start manufacturing at that scale, and where is supply chain to to cater to that demand itself, right? So once there is the supply problem that is addressed, demand is always there.
I know we have Manish and Vasudha, right? Nice to meet you again. I have Manish from Porter and Vasudha from Ostara. Manish, I know, just putting you on the spot, but Porter has been doing a lot of this aggregation in many of the cities. Just want to understand, what is your view? We'll get into the next session, but the two questions we were asking was the electrification target year for MCV and HCV. What would be a realistic year that we would think, and what are one or two key policy measures that you see would be needed to bring about this transition?
So if you talk about LCV, specifically I see there's no vehicle in LCV space at the moment. If there's going to be parity in terms of the ICE vehicle, I think it is going to be in the smaller vehicles first, that is two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and probably sub 1-ton four-wheelers. But I don't see any vehicles beyond that in India manufactured, and I don't even see OEMs around it for the moment. So I think it's pretty long journey for us, 3 to 4 years. Even in the three-wheeler segment or the sub 1-ton segment, most of the vehicles which we are seeing as the first generation vehicles. Now, these first generation vehicles have got a lot of unknowns. So there's a lot of apprehension and people who are picking it up. Individual buyers are not there. People generally, the fleet owners are there, or there are financiers who are really acquiring the vehicles and giving lease so that people try it. So I think we are in infancy. It will take another 3, 4, 5 years. That's my take. Regarding some of the regulations which you are talking about, I think there's a lot of standardization required in all the aspects. So one is the battery technology, so there has to be standardization. Whether you go to a swap model or a charging model, you need some standardization around it. Because if every OEM, and there will be a couple of them and a lot of are flowing in, everybody follows their own standards. So there's no standard then. So it's a customized vehicle. How are you going to have a charging infrastructure all across? Battery technology, telematics, like for example, we as one of the enablers for demand supply matchmaking, one of the important input is the additional telematics information which is there with the vehicle that should flow into us. Today I step in, there are 10 manufacturers, 10 OEMs, everybody has got their own telematics. Whom do I integrate with? And I don't even know after 2 years how many of them are going to exist or not. So I think standardization across telematics, battery technology, charging infrastructure is something which we really expect from the government. That I think there's some work which has already started, but I think it's a long way to go. So to answer your question, yes, it is good 3, 5 years, especially in the LCV space. Sub-LCV space, yes, we'll definitely see something. I can't even comment. It's beyond my thought of it.
So I think we will take a quick break. We'll just take a quick break. So we'll have a masterclass session which Cell Propulsion will be giving us. So in the meantime, we'll just set that up. And I just want to thank everyone. Great discussion. There was a lot of deep dive into policies, technology, and also charging. We touched about finance. In the next session, we're going to talk about finance, business models in depth. But thank you very much. And we'll just take a quick...
No, don't thank, because online people will think this session is ending. So we take a short break and we continue within like 10 minutes or so.
Yes. Yeah. We'll join again in another 10 to 15 minutes, okay?
So requesting all the online participants that, we come back by 12 p.m. It's 11:50 right now, and we'll see you all in 10 minutes after a short coffee break.
All right, thank you.
I'm just going to recheck with our speakers who are joining us online as well. I hope you can hear me, and everybody's back from a short break. We'll start the second half of today with a quick masterclass from Cell Propulsion. Supratim, I'll hand it over to you now. If you can give a quick introduction. Supratim has a video, and followed by a few things that he'll have to say as well. So yeah.
Yeah. We can start? Okay. So hi everyone. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to WRI. And before starting out on this masterclass, we have a very informed group here, so I'm not sure what new we can tell them. But what we have tried to do is initially we wanted to, as a part of this masterclass, we wanted to demonstrate the product that we make, the LCV vehicle, electric vehicle. But then because of logistical issues, we could not get the vehicle here. So we have put together a video which basically talks about all the aspects of the vehicle, which should give a good understanding of how an electric LCV is made. And we can discuss around that topic after that. Also, just pardon the quality of the video, because we have put it together last evening. Yeah, I think we can get started. Before we start the video, just one thing. We actually sell our powertrain units under the brand name of Bison Electric. So that's why you will see Bison Electric in the video, which is basically a brand of Cell Propulsion. Just wanted to, get that confusion aside.
everyone, welcome. My name is Akshay. Today let me show you how we build our electric trucks. This is our retrofitted electric truck built for the commercial vehicle industry. This product is developed for the N1 category and is ICAT certified for the Indian automotive markets. This product features a top speed of 50 km per hour and comes with an ICAT certified range of 157 km and also provides a battery life of over 3 years. All of this while providing a maximum payload capacity of 1 ton. Today, the automotive industry is reinventing itself. We are moving towards a fully electric future. We are focused on reimagining solutions for the commercial vehicle industry. This product today is powered by our proprietary lithium-ion battery technology. So let's take a deeper look at it. This is the core of our battery pack. This is a standard lithium iron phosphate cell which provides a maximum power of 20 watts at 3.2 volts. A single cell can provide and propel our vehicle for up to 120 meters. Further, there are 320 such cells which are integrated in a unique arrangement to provide the overall capacity of a battery pack. To look at it further, this is our proprietary slave battery management system which is completely integrated with the battery pack, which monitors essential information from the battery pack and communicates the same to the master BMS. The final battery pack looks something like this, with the integrated terminals and our communication methodology and our safety features such as the safety valves. The entire system is designed for a maximum discharge of 600 amps, which is specifically made to cater to the needs of the commercial vehicle segment, where there are requirements for high gradability, high overloading capacity, etc. To summarize, this is the brain of our entire vehicle unit. This is our master BMS and controls unit. So this is where all of our monitoring and control integrated electronics are located, and it acts as the brain of our vehicle. When we receive the vehicle for the retrofitment, we initially perform 100% inspection on it to understand and assess the condition of the vehicle. We then proceed to strip down the vehicle of its components such as the internal combustion engine, the powertrain parts and the wire harnesses, etc. are all stripped down to the bare metal. And the individual safety critical systems such as the suspension, braking and the steering go through 100% refurbishment at the end. Then the chassis is repaired and repainted, and this is what it looks like when the chassis is ready for the final assembly. This is what our final integration looks like. We are in the phase of our product where we are performing the safety and the performance checks of the vehicle, and the product is now ready to be fitted with a carriage and to be sent out for the real world testing. We have looked at the products in detail, such as the battery packs, the motor and the battery management system. Now let's have an understanding of the integration. We have the battery packs, battery pack number 1, 2, 3 and 4, which are connected in series to provide a cumulative energy of 24 kilowatt hour, which translates to a real world range of 157 kilometers. Further, this high energy and high voltage is provided and supplied to our motor, liquid cooled motor, which runs at 105 volts and provides a maximum power of 20 kilowatts. Further, this power output is then amplified by our proprietary single stage gearbox, which is then connected to the drivetrain components, which is later utilized by the wheels to propel the vehicle. And now, in order for you to control and monitor this complex system, our master BMS and our control system is integrated over here. This is what it looks like from a user's perspective. We have our proprietary display unit, which displays essential information such as the voltage, the current, and SOC. Further, an additional feature that is added here is the rear view camera. And apart from this, all the necessary data and to understand the real-time driving behavior and the system information such as the states of the machine are all connected to our mobility platform through our 4G module. We have now demonstrated our electric powering platform, which can be fully integrated with any N1 category type vehicle. Now let us take a look at what our final product looks like. This is now fitted with a cargo container and tested to meet our performance specifications. Today we cater to our e-commerce clients, and our electric powertrain platform is highly scalable and customizable to meet the varying needs of various industries such as the FMCG and the brick and mortar industries, just to name a few.
Thank you. I mean, apart from this, there is, I mean, I will be open to questions and, regarding how or what we have to do for building out these electric vehicles. And what I want to say is that typically when it comes to these kind of trucks, because as you have seen the architecture of the powertrain, typically not only for our vehicle, I think most people are having the same thought process of making a modular powertrain or a modular battery system that can easily be tuned, or the specification can easily be changed to meet different loading conditions, different range conditions, and different use cases. So that's where I think electric trucks are more customizable in general as compared to diesel engine vehicles. And I'm open for questions, if any, regarding the product that we showcased, or anything in general regarding electric trucks.
Supratim, if you could just mention a couple of points that I'm pretty sure some of our operators here already know, but to reiterate and to for the benefit of the rest of us who are here, talk a little bit about how each of these different components that you spoke about in the video, how each of these components kind of impact the performance, and how does an operator, from the operator's perspective, what are the different aspects that impact performance, and how, when an electric vehicle is designed and when an electric vehicle is manufactured, what are those specific specifications that we really should not play around with. Say payload can be one of those things. So or range, right? So how do these things essentially impact performance? Just a couple of lines on that.
Sure. Yeah. So typically, from the operator's point of view, the two things that matter the most are, the payload, and actually three things: payload, gradability, and range. Apart from that, any vehicle who is meeting the requirements on these three on these three parameters are typically acceptable by the operator. So range definitely translates to the how much energy you're packing inside the battery pack, how big is your battery pack, and the other thing is how efficiently the battery pack is providing the power to the motor. One of the key things that we did in our vehicle was that we have moved out of the low voltage architecture that typically is predominant in L5 category vehicles like 48 volt or 72 volt architecture. Our battery packs are delivering power at 105 volts, which basically provides a better efficiency because it requires lesser current for the same power delivery. And second thing, on the gradability and overloading criteria, it comes down to the motor that you're using. There is a persistent problem in the in our ecosystem at this point. The motors that we get off the shelf is limited by RPM. The peak RPM, typically what you will get for a 20 kilowatt motor is 6,000, and the typical torque, peak torque, will be around 180 Newton meter. Now, obviously, to drive a bigger payload and have a better gradability, you will be putting a torque multiplication on the gearbox. and people use single stage gearbox for electric vehicles, that's where the top speed of the vehicle gets limited. You know, if you keep multiplying the torque capability, then what happens is the vehicle doesn't move beyond 30 kmph or 35 kmph, which is a problem. That's where it's absolutely important that what type of motor or torque RPM curve you're actually choosing for your motor. In fact, so much so that we have started, you know, working on a new motor design which will push the RPM to 15,000 RPM, peak RPM, so that we can improve on the, along with gradability and torque, we can improve on the overall speed of the vehicle as well. Once these vehicles starts flying intercity on highways, then, you know, a speed of 40 kmph or 50 kmph doesn't make sense actually. You have to at least give 65, 70 or even 80 for that matter. So that's where the choice of motor, RPM and the motor, or people tend to use a standard motor which wouldn't cross 5,000 RPM, which will completely, you know, reduce the performance of the vehicle. So these are some of the aspects of, you know, which has to be looked at from an operator's point of view.
Will also have an impact.
Yes, definitely. So another thing for overloading is the, you know, the axle itself, which predominantly is a mechanical part, but now, you know, all vehicles are moving towards the e-axle concept. I mean, in this vehicle that we have made, because it's a retrofitment, we have put a centrally mounted motor with a propeller shaft. But typically, I mean, we have also started designing our own e-axle because to cater to overloading conditions, the axle has to, first the axle has to take that load. Then only, you know, the drive will be able to deliver that power. So overall, what I can say is, you know, the energy capacity, the voltage, and the overall e-axle configuration is what will cater to all the operator requirements in general. Yeah, that's pretty much on the vehicle side.
So Pratham, is it also possible to use multiple gears or a CVT transmission to resolve this problem of providing speed versus torque when as per requirement?
It is possible, yes. It's just that because electric motors typically have a much bigger RPM range as opposed to, you know, IC engine. It doesn't make, in IC engine it completely makes sense. But in electric motors, the torque RPM curve is such that you can actually design a motor which itself can deliver a bigger RPM. So including a CVT just, you know, how should I put it, just increases the complication of the overall system, because you have more servicing parts, you have more moving parts, which you know, takes the essence of electric vehicle or the electric powertrain itself out of the vehicle. Yeah.
So within one question, how does overloading affect the range of a vehicle, and is there a formula to already check it out? Ki matlab, if overloading is by this percent and the range might reduce by this percent?
So overloading does affect the range, definitely. So I'll tell you, I mean, we said that, you know, we have a range of 150 plus kilometer, but at times we have gotten a range of 130, 135, depending on driving conditions and overloading and all those things. But overloading as a separate parameter will not give you that equation where you can, you know, predict how much the range will come down. It's actually a combination of speed. At what speed you are actually driving the vehicle when it's overloaded. What I would say is typically at around 40 kmph, which is a normal city driving speed, almost 2x overloading could bring down the range by 10 to 15%. Not more than that. This is a very generic statement that I'm making, but mathematically speaking, I think speed has to be factored in a much more, you know, in a much better model actually. Yeah.
I have a question. So you said 157 kilometers. For what payload is that rated?
This
that
is
range.
This is for 1 ton payload.
1 ton.
That's what I was saying. With 1 ton actually we normally get less than 150. I mean 130, 135.
And then there's weather. There's how much of a what else is working.
Driving
in the
condition.
Driving condition. Are you going up a slope? And
yeah.
Any.
Yes.
And And why 4 batteries in series?
So actually, yeah, that's a very interesting question. We wanted to. Yeah. Okay. So we wanted to design the system for retrofitment. If you make a single battery, right, which can pack 24 kilowatt hour, then you get your requirements on the battery shape and size gets tied down to the chassis itself. So with this kind of a modular architecture, we wanted to make a brick type of an arrangement so that we can cater to different models of different vehicles. Like we have actually used the same powertrain on 3 different models already, and we have gotten the similar performance from all the vehicles. Why connected in series is you could have also done it like 4 battery packs connected in parallel, but the problem is that the effectiveness of BMS usage goes down because in parallel strings anyway the BMS is monitoring when it's connected in series, the slave BMSs. So it only makes sense to connect them in series typically to make a full pack as opposed to the connecting them parallel externally. Internally we have a parallel configuration obviously where we give up to 600 amps of discharge. But this modular battery architecture was mostly to cater to different chassis sizes in the N1 category, like maybe Tata is Mega, Super Ace. There is what? Mahindra, what was that? Supro, yeah, Mahindra Supro is another vehicle where we have, done a demo on this one. Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Amazing vehicle, superb specs. Typically, I don't know how it works when it comes to retrofitted vehicles, the servicing part of it. We've been working with a couple of them where the vehicle is made by someone else, the drivetrain is somebody else's, and the batteries are someone else's. We get pushed across the table. नहीं ये mechanical है, please go there. नहीं ये electrical है, please go here. ये battery है, यहाँ पर जाके बात करो. And typically we lose what, a week only in finding out which problem and where do we go.
Yeah.
That's a huge downtime for us.
Yeah.
1 day's downtime is huge. How does it work with you all? Where do I go in case of a breakdown? Is it Tata or is it
No, for us, we are a one-stop, servicing solution. We take care of the entire powertrain. In the battery, the main system is ours, and by end of the year, probably the motor and drive will also be ours. We are already working on this in the pipeline.
Even the non-powertrain parts are handled by and managed by us for the customer.
Amazing. That's
yeah. So
comforting to know.
and that's why in the video also we said that we don't do just retrofitment. We take the vehicle and we refurbish it completely ground up. We even work with brake liners. We even work on the axle, so that later on if there's a breakdown, we can service all those parts as well. Yeah.
All right.
Can you pull out the online chat and questions for me?
Yeah.
Any questions online?
What is?
So someone's asking, this type of battery architecture may create difficulty in battery swapping. How do you solve this problem if you use battery swapping technology?
Yeah, I mean battery swapping for this size of a vehicle, I mean we personally we don't think that it's something which should be pursued. Battery swapping works very well for 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers because it's a lighter battery pack and it doesn't need a lot of infrastructure to swap. This one typically one of our battery modules, we have 4 of them. One is 70 kgs. So I mean it's not humanly possible to swap it yourself. And as we go into heavier and heavier vehicles, although there has been demonstration of battery swapping in heavier vehicles, but we don't think it's a feasible option infrastructurally speaking, and we don't design the system for swappability as such.
And high voltage issues are also.
Yes, and because we have a high voltage architecture, swapping also poses a threat there, because when you have a high voltage system, you have to do a lot of checks on the overall electrical integration. So just plugging and taking out a vehicle and taking out a battery pack and plugging it may cause integration issues, which might lead to failures, more severe failures in the vehicle and such. Yeah.
For the benefit of audience, can you define what is the threshold of low voltages versus high voltage?
I mean, yeah. beyond, I mean, at least voltage should be in 3 digits. That's what I can say. I mean, it 2-digit voltages doesn't, it does make sense for two-wheelers and all, I get that, because the power delivery is very less, like 3 kilowatt. In our vehicle, I think if it's fully loaded and if you're on a grade, it will go up to 30, 35 kilowatt. There, if you're at 48 volts, then, you know, the efficiency is going down drastically.
You know, there's a company called Ample in the US.
Okay.
They do automated swapping for cars in the US, because US is a car market.
Yeah.
So they actually have these automated stations which will robotically swap the battery pack.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's absolutely possible. People have, I think, Sun Mobility has demonstrated on a bus itself. NIO also does that, yeah.
But the point is that, anyways, battery swapping is going to be an intermittent solution for these vehicles. And this infrastructure investments for a country like India would not make much sense also. So where you can do a manual swap in two-wheelers or three-wheelers, it's going to be a very quick adoption, and there would be specific use cases you can look at. In this segment in which we are operating, there are also not such use cases because the routes are fixed and the servicing times and operating times of vehicles are also fixed. So you can actually plan out the operations.
All right.
There are some more questions, I think.
Actually, in the interest of time, I think we'll move on to our next masterclass. We will definitely come back to these questions.
Okay.
But I'd like to call on Dev to give us our next presentation and masterclass. Dev will be talking about the innovative business and financing models that are currently being developed within the electric freight ecosystems. So on to you, Dev.
I'll try to keep it very brief because I think a lot of these stakeholders that are present here already know a lot of this stuff. So I'll try to share a lot of, focus more on insights. So that would be the core focus here. So essentially, Alt Mobility is a commercial electric fleet rental and lifecycle management platform. You want to go to the next slide? Yeah, so we enable fleet electrification in India with affordable leasing solutions. The idea was to essentially, the mission of the company is essentially to catalyze, to accelerate India's transition to sustainable mobility. And having our own background coming from, from sustainable energy financing, we looked at this space and said that financing was a major barrier that needed to be addressed. There's fantastic people doing great work in logistics space, great work in terms of charging infrastructure, fantastic OEMs, but how do you get the vehicle in the hands of customers and address the core challenges? Those are things that we started focusing on as a company. The first thing that came to us was how do we look at the way that fleet electrification is happening? It is being driven largely by the commercial fleet segment, which means that you're seeing mostly an adoption of two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Four-wheelers we're now seeing also coming into play and integrating into the ecosystem. It is initially was driven by climate thesis of major e-commerce companies, but largely the demand has now been driven towards, driven by economics. So economics plays a huge part. Are we able to demonstrate that EVs are able to save fleet operators and e-coms on monthly operating cost? If so, then the transition to EVs will happen faster. The greater the differential between the ICE operating costs and EV costs, the faster the transition will happen. So essentially, the model that we offer to logistics and e-com companies is that it's a capex-light transition. There are no upfront costs that are involved in switching to electric vehicles. It's a flexible lease in terms of how we offer the tenures. The asset is on the balance sheet of Alt Mobility or its financing partners, and we essentially provide an asset-light ways to logistic partners to switch to electric. And I think this is something that's fundamentally changing with the introduction of electric vehicles. Conventional model has been to look at a driver come ownership model, where the driver is essentially bringing the vehicle to the platform. And they're essentially attaching themselves to perhaps a smaller fleet operator. The fleet operator is then working with an aggregator. The aggregator is then working with an e-com or a larger logistics partner. There are multiple layers. In the ICE space, the ownership of the vehicle always resided with the drivers. The transition that we're seeing with the introduction of EVs is that the ownership of the vehicle is not with drivers, because drivers are currently apprehensive to introduce EVs and purchase EVs. One is because of lack of financing options. And second is not enough confidence in the technology. So there will be like any new product in the market, there is going to be a learning curve that's going to be associated with the introduction of vehicles. Another core value proposition that we offer is it's a hassle-free service. So we're a single one-stop fleet electrification solution, helping logistic partners select the right vehicles, helping them finance 100% of the cost. That includes vehicle registrations, insurances, road tax, service and maintenance is also within our scope. It's an operating lease structure. And finally, the core objective is how do we create that differential in savings by continuing to work on reducing the cost of capital, which essentially translates to lower EMIs or lower lease rentals for end users. Next slide, please. So we look at ourselves as a fulfillment platform where we're working almost with every single stakeholder on the ground, whether it's financiers, where we're acting as a catalyst to bring in access to finance, and getting lenders to come in and participate in the ecosystem. I'll speak a little bit more about the challenges that lenders are facing while looking into this space. But the core value that we're able to create is bankability. How do we introduce bankability both in terms of customer risk and asset risk, and bring comfort around lenders participating in this space and working with us to channel capital into financing of electric vehicles? We work with fleet operators where we offer them a CapEx light way to switch to electric. Flexible ownership, we include aspects such as vehicle refurbishment, service and maintenance, and to some extent also provide an uptime guarantee to ensure that the vehicles are constantly up and running. And that's all in collaboration with OEMs, which are one of the largest and most important stakeholders. We very closely work with OEMs to piece together a product. And the product here is not the vehicle, it's the financing product, which is essentially how do we get the lowest possible cost by creating an ecosystem for end customers to provide reliability. Because we own assets within our fleet, we are in the best possible position to aggregate demand. We're in the best possible position to aggregate servicing, to also be in a position to be able to hold OEMs accountable for the longevity and performance of the assets. So a large part of these discussions revolve around what are going to be the costs that are going to be associated over the life cycle of the vehicle, and how do we factor those costs within our business model to ensure that all of this is very predictable to the end customers, because they don't end up paying any extra out-of-pocket expenses for service or breakdowns or repairs. It's all built into the costing that we work together with our OEM partners. And finally, you have the charging and parking infrastructure. One of the biggest challenges that the infrastructure provider faces today is capacity utilization. Commercial fleets present an opportunity to increase that because fastest growing in terms of penetration is commercial fleets. So how do you create a business model around creating comfort for infrastructure providers to make investments in the right places where they can increase the capacity utilization of their infrastructure? Next slide, please. So essentially, this marketplace that we're creating for EVs is dedicated for commercial vehicles. You don't have something like this for ICE vehicles today. And the idea is to utilize our economies of scale and procurement power to create a very unique experience for fleet operators to come in and switch to electric. That starts with an easy onboarding process where a user can come online on our website, which is going to be up live very soon, select the right vehicle suited for their operations, choose a subscription plan, and immediately submit their documents for a quick credit check and get an instant approval for their vehicle. they can immediately then, once the vehicle is handed over to them, they can look at how to manage that vehicle real time. We're not just talking about GPS location and number of trips. We're really going deeper into what it takes to operate and manage that vehicle over its entire life cycle. That means looking at technical parameters such as cell temperature, voltage, current, looking at vehicle health, the battery health, looking at all these different parameters that help us do predictive and corrective maintenance. So before a vehicle breaks down, you want to be in a position to be able to understand when that's going to happen, and be able to then navigate that person to the nearest service station, which is eligible for that particular vehicle, to create that seamless journey for that user to be able to come in and fix the issue. We're also looking at tracking parameters like driver behavior and feedback to train drivers on how to better optimize and get the maximum performance of the vehicle. We're also looking at other ecosystem services such as providing access to charging infrastructure, locating the nearest charging points, booking slots, locating the nearest service garages, looking at incentivizing drivers to even look at how, if a vehicle is managed better, can we provide you discounts on your lease rental because you're operating a vehicle much better than, in a way that reduces your overall operating costs. So these are things that we work on as a platform. Could you move to the next slide? So when we look at the core stakeholders again, we categorize them into 5 different buckets. One is your demand generators, which are your early adopters for electric vehicles. In this case, your e-commerce companies and fleet operators and aggregators. You have OEMs, new age OEMs, as well as existing OEMs that are coming into the space. You have infrastructure providers. You have fleet operators and drivers. We're talking about smaller fleet operators here, which is the large majority of the market. And then you're talking about financiers. Now for EV ecosystem to scale, it is going to be extremely crucial for all of these 5 elements to succeed. If one of them is not working, we're not going to be able to crack the code towards an accelerated transition. And so I'm going to just talk briefly about what are the perspective of each of these stakeholders and what drives them to switch to electric. So when you talk about demand generators, I think I was in a meeting with one of the largest logistic aggregators in India today. He said an interesting thing. It's that demand is driven by economics, which means that it has to be cost sensitive and operational agnostic. When you're switching from a DCO model to someone like an aggregator leasing directly vehicles from a company, that's a fundamental shift in how logistic operations works, has conventionally worked over the last decades. And this transition is again being driven by economics, which means that people are going to look at how to reduce costs in whatever way possible, using whatever vehicle possible, whatever technology possible. The end objective is to reduce the overall operating cost for the end customers, whether it's a cost per shipment model. Now, when you look at these fleet aggregators, some of them are doing this to seed the market and eventually move away to a DCO model where drivers are getting more confidence and small fleet operators getting more confidence in adopting to EVs. Or it could be a sustained approach where these platforms may come in and directly lease vehicles and actually eliminate aggregators altogether. We're seeing both of these stories play out in different segments as we are speaking to customers on the ground. And we believe that the systemic change that EVs are going to bring are not just in terms of cleaner and sustainable mobility, but it's going to fundamentally transform the structure of how business is done in logistics. And we're going to see a lot of innovations and a lot of pilots that are going to be conducted. One of the major e-commerce companies is exploring directly leasing vehicles. Now that's a fundamental change in how they're completely eliminating aggregators from between and looking at how they can reduce their costs to create a more effective structure. In terms of demand and how logistic operations are carried out, there are typically 3 types of operations. One is you're looking at e-commerce operations where it's pick and drop shipments to multiple delivery points. Then there's a hub-to-hub model, which is usually the most easiest model where you're taking goods from hub A to hub B. And there's an on-demand model. It's a combination of all of these that really comprise intracity logistics. And when we are looking at customers and demand, looking at analyzing their switch to electric, it's always while comparing how it compares to, let's say, a Tata Ace, which is the most driven, or an alternate to a Tata Ace, which is the most driven four-wheeler in the market. Now, this transition from a four-wheeler to a three-wheeler is itself a structural change, again, driven by economics. Earlier, you had two drivers within a single vehicle. Now you're having a driver come delivery model where the driver is essentially doing the deliveries. Move on to the next slide, please. So in terms of demand generators, the journey for a fleet aggregation platform is typically, when they're looking at introducing EVs into their fleet, is really going to OEMs and conducting EV trials. So that typically lasts for a period of 7 days to 1 month. We've had customers looking at even doing 3-month trials before they get comfortable with understanding the operational feasibility of operating an EV into their fleet. When we talk about operational feasibility, we're talking about parameters like number of shipments that can be delivered, number of cartons, number of packets, the range that is operated, the payload capacity, the volume capacity. Once they're satisfied on all the parameters that this particular vehicle can potentially replace a four-wheeler, it then comes down to the economics. Is the economics of switching to electric going to make more sense? What we have seen recently is that for a typical Tata Ace, you're spending about 38,000 to 40,000 rupees. Plus, you have a second helper which is involved that brings your cost to about 52,000 rupees. When you're switching to a three-wheeler, in this case, you're essentially eliminating the additional person and making the economics viable simply because, and simply by eliminating the person. It is potentially not that EVs are completely replacing, able to completely beat ICE vehicles in the commercial aspects. It simply happens so that once you are able to eliminate the additional person and switch to a three-wheeler model, that's really where the savings is coming from. Because you're essentially introducing a new vehicle compared to replacing it with a second-hand Tata Ace, which is probably already exhausted, they've completed its EMI payments and so on. So the transition is kind of at par today, if not higher for EVs. So customers, in some sense, are paying a small premium or a small discount, but it's really on the borderline right now, and we're seeing that as costs decrease, I think we'll have to bring in more efficiencies about thinking not just in terms of technology, how costs are falling down, but also in terms of vehicle utilization, about how you can utilize a vehicle in multiple shifts to make that economics work out. In terms of OEMs, we as a platform, we evaluate OEMs on multiple parameters. There's a 100-point checklist that we have before we onboard any OEM on the platform. And the objective is to work on a collaborative approach where we're working with OEMs to understand the entire life cycle costs, and then we work on an approach to map out those costs and are able to amortize those costs over a longer period to create a more sustainable and lower cost model for transition. The current technologies we're working with include NCA, LFP, and we're also doing LTO very soon. Serviceability is one of the major components. We are talking about beta versions of every single manufacturer that's rolled out their vehicles right now. There are bound to be a lot of problems. So our objective is to essentially work with OEMs to create very strong SLAs, very strong turnaround times. As Daryl was mentioning, there's going to be a single day of downtime wipes out almost half the margin for a fleet aggregator. So it's very crucial to have these ecosystems in place. And we want to work it as a platform to become that single point of contact for any kind of an issue, any kind of a breakdown. And we're using tech-enabled tracking of battery health, service alerts to do diagnostics and performance-related issues, essentially to improve the longevity and performance of the asset on the ground. Infrastructure plays a massive role. Specifically, when we were talking about the economics perspective, we fundamentally believe that OEMs in the LCV space need fast charging capabilities. And that is absolutely critical from the perspective of vehicle utilization. If you're utilizing a vehicle for 8 to 12 hours, you're probably not being able to maximize the amount of revenue that can be potentially earned from that vehicle. And fast charging plays a massive role in terms of how it's able to improve the earnings of that partner and overall ensure that it's able to bring in recovery and recovery of cost and diversification for even a lender to look at how they're evaluating a particular contract is not limited to one customer, but multiple customers and multiple revenue streams that are coming in. And so we believe that a shared ecosystem model is what's going to be prevalent instead of installing a fast charging station at an Amazon dock. It makes more sense to have it in a shared infrastructure space where you're able to utilize it across multiple fleets, multiple customers, because fundamentally what's wrong with a dedicated hub model is that the vehicle shifts are very constant. If it's a 8 a.m. to a 2 p.m. shift, then all the vehicles are going to land at 2 p.m. for fast charging, and you're going to need to set up more and more, increase the quantity of fast charging stations where the CUF will still remain quite low. In terms of financing, I think the last piece, lenders are apprehensive about resale value. Nobody's seen an entire life cycle of the vehicle. The biggest concern they have is if a customer defaults, how do you sell that vehicle when there's no secondary market available for it? They don't have confidence in new age OEMs, which means they're comfortable doing a Mahindra or a Piaggio, but they will not probably do a Grevol or a cell propulsion here. So it's very important to create that comfort, and the value that Alt is able to create here again is how do we kind of do the underwriting on the asset and technology and position ourselves as an asset manager, which is managing all the obligations with regards to the service maintenance, looking at how we're able to do a tech-enabled asset monitoring and revenue management for lenders, how we're able to give redeployment assurance. Let's not talk about resale guarantees, let's talk about redeployments. Because fundamentally, the leasing model that we work on is essentially focused on our ability to constantly redeploy the vehicle in different customer segments. And finally, we do vehicle lifecycle management, which is not just looking at a 3-year tenure. What happens to the vehicle when the battery pack capacity is not suitable for mobility applications after 3 years with 70 to 80% capacity utilization left in the battery pack? We look at vehicle refurbishing and upgrading the battery pack, and look at a much more longer tenure kind of an arrangement where the effective lease rental after 3 years will probably fall down by about 40–50%. That creates a more viable market for secondary vehicles, secondary EVs that we would be running once the first life cycle is complete. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Dev, for that presentation. I think you've been able to shed light on the journey that a company takes in terms of how you actually come up with your business model, and it's really interesting to see all the different services that you are offering as a part of Alt Mobility. Just to kickstart the second part of this conversation, which is on the innovative business models that several of our operators here have already had to develop and operate on, considering that you've pivoted to electric freight vehicles already. I would like to start with Mr. Lakkaraju. I know that in the previous session you did talk a little bit about how larger scale companies like yours are looking at decarbonization. You did mention that there are certain parts of it that are already electric. But when we are talking about road freight, how advanced is this conversation of electrification of the vehicles? And is there a sense of conducting a pilot test for larger vehicles, or is that already happening within the ecosystem? Can you shed a little light on that, please?
Good. So definitely it's a subject that we are discussing on a regular basis. It's not that one day we just decide that we're going to discuss it. One. Two, we have been honestly trying to pilot on certain routes, and this is what I was sharing with Pawan also, is that we can't do it on all routes, but we know what are our peak routes as our business. For example, for the pharma vertical, and this will be vertical specific, we won't do it as a general. For example, the requirements of a perishable industry or a pharma industry are on the Bombay-Goa route. We know on that route the manufacturing happens in Goa and the cargo has to come into Bombay. Similarly, we know that the pharma happens at Vizag and it has to come into Hyderabad. So we are ready to pilot on certain routes, because then if some infrastructure has to be created or some checkpoints have to be created, our trucks go with an escort. Because the biggest factor that comes today in the pharma transportation is the value is extremely high. And then there is an issue that on a diesel operated truck, the driver tries to save money by switching off the engine. Now in an electric, that problem is solved to a larger extent. So there are two things that we are trying to do. We were trying to work with Shell on this project. But today in this forum, it's an advantage that if someone else wants to work on that, we are okay in terms of what portion we have to invest and what portion of technology can come into it. And we are more than open to do this bit of it because this is important from a multiple thing, because fuel prices are not going to come down. Because you have the geopolitics of now the Russia thing and the Ukraine thing happening, to multiple things happening. So if you're expecting that fuel prices are going to come. But what customers are expecting is that we bring down the overall cost for them. So what we are also doing in the piloting is that today why we are able to confidently say that we will be a 3,500 trucks player or 5,000 trucks player is we are seeing the demand visibility. Because during the COVID what happened is that e-commerce has just gone out of control. And companies like Blinkit are assuring, saying 9 minutes we will deliver. We are not guaranteeing that. But what the pressure on us is to deliver the goods at the warehouses on time. Because if we don't do that, then they can't deliver sort of it. So this will be a constant discussion. It will not be a one-day discussion. But we are seriously looking at piloting in two verticals. One is the food vertical, which is like brands like Del Monte and whom we are talking. Basically for seeing that the temperature of the product is also maintained at -20 degrees at even in a 45 degrees environment. Because today general cargo is okay, like someone said that the storage of ordinary goods doesn't need temperature control. But today if you're looking at frozen food, you're looking at pharma APIs, visibly from outside you can't see whether it is a rotten apple. But the shelf life of the product comes down if it is not maintained at the right temperature. So I think these are critical areas in which we are seriously doing a lot of research. For the pharma vertical, we have just started the construction. I think 30 days from now, the innovation center in Hyderabad will be up and running. What we are looking at is, someone spoke about standardization. There we are looking at how can we optimize in terms of using slip sheets against palletization and bringing down the total size, because if you can bring down the weight of the cargo by not asking the manufacturers to really rework their packaging, but if you can find a way of storing more and efficiently transportation. Even there's some other product on which we are working for -20, where the weight of the box using a specific puff panels with a PCM based technology, we are able to bring it down by 130 kilos for a pallet, which then will be able to, so these are things which I think can't happen without research and innovation. You will have to invest in it, and very few people want to invest in it. But we are okay to invest because we see in the long term it will benefit. I was talking to Raghavendra Mysore also that we are okay to even pilot on any project like this, because that is the need of the hour. So I'm very clear that this needs a larger attention of management and can't be left to people at ground level to take a call. And we are also looking as to how to map this whole thing, because data is God for us. And if we can't put this data together and saying, have we achieved something, then it doesn't make sense. So we want to do pilot runs, see what is happening. Really, are we getting some end result out of it? Then present that data. So September 15th and 16th, we're doing an event in Hyderabad at a CEO level. It's only on invite. From 27 countries, we are bringing in people to address certain things in terms of specific verticals. Like I said, I will not go and say I'll do something for automotive. Their requirement is different. But pharma and food is where we are seeing that constant demand for food is going to be there. Food habits are going to change. And this will be an area where we think we will have to really innovate and be more different. We just can't get pastas at 900 rupees a kilo and say you go and buy it. People will pick us up and throw us out straight away. So we realize that these are areas which we have to address. So I hope that answers the...
All right. The next question is actually for Daryl and Manish. You guys have already started incorporating a lot of the EVs into your fleet. What would be helpful if you could just talk about what is the ownership model that you have currently in the kind of operations that you do, and then if if you could throw some light, given your experience, to throw some light into how your operational models have changed because of operating EVs. Have they changed at all, or is there something that needs to be adopted? Your business models, do they need to be adopted? And if the drivers need an additional support to operate these kind of vehicles.
Okay, so I take the second one first. With EV coming in, how does the operational model change? So before I really get to that, let me tell what we do exactly. So we are on-demand, tech-enabled logistic platform, intracity. So you can, in simple terms, we are a Uber for logistics. So you are looking for a vehicle and you want to transport goods. We provide vehicles, just like you book a cab in Uber. It's a similar model. Entire fleet which we have, almost like 99% of it is driver come owner fleet. So when I say driver come owner, they are individual people who are owning the vehicle and driving on the platform. So we don't work with fleet. So when EV came into picture, this completely changed. The very first thing which we changed was the working model. So we are working with a lot of fleet partners now, because EV is not owned by individuals at the moment. They're expensive. Secondly, their financing is not available, and so on and so forth. So that was a very big change for us. Second thing is, we have been a freelance-based model, where it's an open model where every driver is treated equally. Now, when EV came into picture, this is the first time we have to bring some biasness in the system. Like, for example, I have to restrict my trip to a EV partner within 20 kilometers. Or I have to give location preference to my partner. Third thing is probably when they log in, so I have to really give them deferred login, that is 4-hour login, and then you take a break, and then you again log in because there's some time to charge and all that. These were big changes for us because it moved from a very open marketplace, it moved to a more biased marketplace. Fourth thing, we never worked on guarantees. We said people come on the platform, they log in, they do whatever they want to do, but and whatever business they do, it's all yours. But this is the first time we started to give business guarantees to people, just for running the ecosystem, be part of the ecosystem. We have to be very strict with our compliance in terms of overloading and all that, because the performance of the vehicle changes because of that. So operationally, we have to really make a lot of changes. The question is, why you want to do it? On paper, it looks that it is going to be, economically, it is going to make much more sense. 10 to 15% improvement in the operating economics of a vehicle. Though on ground it is not there at the moment, but yes, you work with that optimism that it is going to work and it is going to get you more margin. Secondly, being a dominant player in the market, we see that we got a moral responsibility to help build this ecosystem, and that's why we are doing our bit on that. Okay. Currently, our EV plays around 1,000 odd vehicles, majorly in three-wheeler space. We majorly work with fleet partners, and we probably would be focusing on two-wheeler and three-wheeler for the coming year, and probably we intend to do 5,000 vehicles by the end of the year. That was the second question. The very first question was, can you just repeat the question once again?
Yeah, so what was the business model that you talked about, and what is the ownership model?
So on the ownership model, that's very interesting thing. As I mentioned, we operated with only one model, that is all fleet. Everybody was an individual owner plus driver. With EV, also it is, but we are working with different players. But there are very interesting models which we are seeing, which are emerging on our platform. So on one side, we have fleet partners who own the vehicle, and then they are running the fleet on our platform. Other side, we have seen there are a lot of financing companies and investors who have bought the vehicles and have been offering them for lease. Then we also see a lot of players who are actually, we have DCO model whereby some of the drivers taking advantage of the finance, whatever available finance is available is there. So we are asset light, but we have seen a lot of EV ownership models which are emerging on our platform. So these are different models we can see. And in some cases, we are also seeing some of the OEMs stepping up and saying that my vehicle is available as a service. And that model also we have seen on a platform. Yeah.
Right. Just building on from where Manish spoke, and being a fleet operator ourselves, we operate a large EV fleet on Porter as well. If I go back a year back, the time when we actually started the cargo mobility business, I would be comfortable to say that we were the early people who went to the biggies of the leasing companies, the ORIX, the ALDs, the lease plans, and spoke about leasing the three-wheeler cargo vehicles. None of these biggies were keen or even open to talk about cargo vehicle leasing as an asset class. COVID also, I think, had a fairly big impact. For banking sector, transportation became a suspect segment. They weren't very keen to lend to that segment. Though cargo, I see, is one of the few segments which has had a positive COVID impact. The numbers of transactions have multifold. E-commerce have taken it to the next level. So back around May, June, we had very, very few NBFCs who were even open to talk about leasings. The IRRs were fairly high. The SD components which these leasing companies would ask us to put upfront as capex would sometimes make the project IRRs unviable at our end. Also, what they've mentioned, the typical NBFCs like the Mahindras and the Tatas would be keen to fund a Mahindra vehicle or a Piaggio vehicle, but these vehicles today don't make sense in the applications which are currently running in the market. So on Porter, a Piaggio cannot run, which gives a 60-65 kilometer range on a single charge. You need vehicles which today Grey Wall or an Altigreen makes, which are long-range vehicles, at least to the sense that they give 100 kilometers range on a single charge. It took us a period of 6 months to get these leasing companies get their skin in, and at least talking to fund an Altigreen, a Grey Wall, an Euler vehicles, which are now new age vehicles, which fit to the applications which an Amazon, a PNG or a Big Basket is asking us to deliver as a fleet operator. So I think financing has been a huge pain area, and if I have to put a number as my designation reads head business development, but if I have to put a number, over 50% of my business time is spent on finding leasing and funding channel partners for funding my business. We don't see any demand side challenges. I think we are very lucky to be playing in an industry which has, I think, a multiplier on demand, where a client wants to deploy 1,000 vehicles, but cumulatively all operators can't deploy even 200 vehicles. The ecosystem isn't supporting enough. The financing is in place. We are also a charging enabler. We set up CPOs and we enable electric fleets. We see huge challenges even in setting up charging infrastructure even before my vehicles can start flying. So that has been our thing. DCO is still some time away, some distance away. I spoke about reliabilities of these vehicles. A single day downtime of the vehicle actually shaves off 50% of that month's margin. Two days downtime, which means it's a 0 month for me, right? So the day reliability comes, that's when a DCO guy is going to put his money on the table and is going to buy a vehicle. Till such time, it's we, the startups, who are putting our blood onto the table. Honestly, the leasing companies are leasing on our books. They take a good 3 months due diligence, do a credit analysis on our books, and they lend on our books. The second way of lending and leasing happening in the market is OEMs funding their own vehicles. It's not the banks, it's not the NBFCs who are taking a step forward, biting some portion of the risk. No, it's the OEM, it's the fleet operators like us who's having to push that bait and probably lead up to a phase where this becomes a viable space for all of us.
I really feel the pain of this, and I know this having worked in this space. So as an introduction, I'm an investment banker. And I have advised companies in this space on their fundraising, so I know, about the challenges of this business model. And I think one of the underlying reasons for this also is that three-wheeler financing has typically been quite unorganized. It has not had these large, like lease plan and all, they are more into the cars. They talk to you. I have a client who's a very large car fleet company. They have multiple thousands of cars and their driver owned, similar to what he mentioned, and now the model has to change, because even in cars this is happening when you're a mobility player. But the thing is that with the credit quality of the balance sheet of the fleet operator or the car fleet operator, or etc., the leasing company will find comfort in that company and then therefore build a bridge. Because the other thing that has also happened, probably, I don't know, probably less so in the logistics space, but it has happened across the board, is that driver, owner, credit qualities have gotten, credit histories have gotten ruined, or they've definitely gotten damaged. And as a result of this, when you are a aggregation platform and you want more of these driver owners, they are also finding it difficult, right? So that is a challenge. But if you're a fleet operator, you need support either as a first loss guarantee from the financier actually, which should come through. So if you, maybe, I don't know if the SBI program is something that is now coming in, because I've seen the car companies being benefiting from that, and therefore they get maybe 8-9%, kind of loans on electric cars, which are now the largest selling is of course a Tata car. So if something like that can unlock it, then even the smaller financiers can kind of come into the game. But that is where the challenge is. I think the three-wheeler financing market has been dominated by unorganized players.
Unorganized work to the tune of 22, 24, 26%, honestly. Even if when they get commercial lending, that's the levels.
I have a question here, and more of out of curiosity. So with these kind of problems, like how does an alt mobility can come in and help out?
They are putting their blood on the table as well as another startup.
But Dave, just keep one thing in mind, is that we also give 90 days credit in the market, because when I started, 99% of my business was on cash and 1% was on credit. India, probably in the logistics sphere and cargo, we are not putting blood, we have put everything, there's nothing left with us now. Okay, and also to tell you all the truth is, none of us want our children to come into this industry, sadly. Every doctor wants his son to come and rest of them. But the other side of the story is, we have uppar sherwani, andar parishani. I'm telling you guys that, look, some of us are fighting it hard and we will continue, but the other side is that the end customer also is not paying us on time. Especially on the pharma side, the demand, every contract we are signing is now for 90 days. So that means the cash flow that I want today is not for 200 crores. I need 600 crores to run, because if my billing is 200 crores, I have to rotate 600 crores. So imagine, it's easy from one side that, government wants the overall logistic cost to come down. It's all dreams on the stage. For heaven's sake, ask the government to come down and be on the ground to understand our pain really, because we are a sinking ship. It's the first time that during COVID, the shipping lines took their blood from all the exporters, which is why companies like Maersk and all are sitting on $33 billion and $40 billion. But this took the whole independence to do it now. So the karma circle is probably going in its rounds, but the other side is not so green as it looks really. So if you are financing, it's good and it's happy situation, but the other side is that, how will we pay back also if someone finances, if we are only getting paid in 90 days?
See, one way to shorten that, see, that's a core of this, what you said, right? So one is that in your own, and you're running a fleet?
We run fleet, we do end to end, we do everything. There's nothing left we don't do. The only thing that's left is I don't manufacture. Otherwise, I know their value at what they export, at what value they import also, no? To which country they are sending also I know. It's not that I don't have the data. But then the flip side is that they expect us to pack the goods, they expect us to put it in a container, they expect it to put it on a ship and make us responsible till it reach Brazil also. No? We get only paid after the cargo has reached. And if there's a claim because of a water leakage, then also we are held responsible.
some of these are fundamental challenges of the freight forwarding industry itself. But I think one way that I have seen companies kind of go over it or resolve it or try to attempt to do it is again a part of the startup ecosystem where technology is being used to create models where you can you can match your timings in or the credit period that you give to your driver, for instance. I mean, obviously a lot of this is bridging the financing gaps and all of this. There are so many links in that chain that if you get 90-day credit, I mean, you have to give 90-day credit terms to your customer, which frankly is a lot. Enterprise customers do, and I'm guessing you're talking also about international shipments.
No, GE's credit period is 120 days. For heaven's sake, are we talking that GE doesn't have the money to pay your vendors? I'm not talking about ordinary. I think the Indian customers still have an heart. You can go and present an invoice and tell him, sir, I have to pay Diwali bonus. Can you expedite my payment? But we're talking about global accounts.
So there are models that are coming in. I don't know how much it is happening here, but I have heard of now driver invoice discounting for the driver. So he gets a little bit of liquidity in the interim. And I mean, the freight industry has of course had some of those solutions which again add to the cost only. But for the driver, I think some of that, though we really want to, what we want to do using technology is shorten the time of payment to the driver, which is really the largest cost in most of the aggregation models at least, and then use some financing facility that they can kind of use to bridge the gap that you have if you have to take a credit period, etc.
But we pay our drivers on 30 days. So surprisingly, if you look at our contracts with all our partners, we don't harass them like we get harassed. Because since we are unhappy doesn't mean that we make others unhappy. It's not a situation. So yes, we don't do that. So that is it. Similarly, because you have to still pay your employees, you have to pay your rents, those will still remain. But our business model, for you all to understand, is unfortunately not then situation that you get everything in 30 and you get sort of it. So that is a challenge that is going to also hamper any new initiatives, because where do I get the additional money now? Keep in mind that the ocean freight from China to India was say $2,000, which went up to $6,000. The ocean freight from Navasheva to LA was supposed $5,000. It's gone to $17,000. So that means on a $17,000, you give a credit of 90 days. It's like suicide. So you have to choose whom to give and whom not to give. So it's a little tricky situation. Probably Pawan will get a little worried, but don't get worried. We will sort of it. It's not to make you all, but these are realities which government also has to step in some point of time of getting us that little bit of extra working capital.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but one thing to answer your question, Nakul, though on ground EV situation looks a little scary at the moment, but if you see the excitement level even in the driver community, it's pretty high, because on paper it looks like a very attractive proposition, because typically a driver or a driver owner has got 30 to 40% of his operation cost is the fuel cost, and with fuel cost going up, and it is almost like in case of diesel it's almost 1/8 of the cost, so it looks very attractive on paper. See, it's only when you jump into it you realize that there are challenges are much more than what they are, but it's not that it's not going to remain forever. It's just 1 year, 2 years. A lot of things are going to streamline on that.
Yes, I agree to that. I mean, the unit economics work out on paper. That's why there is all this interest and incentive. The key thing is that, like the pain points that Magenta has talked about, and a potential solution that Alt is bringing up. So essentially, how do they merge? Would actually create that opportunity which everyone wants to leverage.
Just one thing to add to this.
And we are more interested to understand how, like a vehicle manufacturer, we can come in and play a part there, because the story of our segment is yet to get started, and there will be a lot of learnings from what is happening with the three-wheeler operators, the three-wheeler financing, and how does that extrapolate to four-wheelers and larger trucks.
So one thing which I have seen, see, in this entire ecosystem, all three constituents, that is the financing partner, the OEM, and the fleet, they have to work in tandem. That is so we are working with certain OEMs and leasing companies, and then we bring in our business guarantee and we take it as a proposition to the driver. So what probably players like Alt or GOBP would do to the market is they're going to create this market. So there's a lot of excitement in the driver that he wants to really want to own a vehicle, but since there are a lot of apprehensions around it, so this eases the pain. So he's going to probably go for a leasing model for a couple of months, and then when he's comfortable with the vehicle and he's decided whatever vehicle he wants to go for and what model, then probably he's going to really jump the gun and really purchase a vehicle. So it's more of a ecosystem development exercise which Alt or GOBP like people are doing at the moment.
Just to add one thing to this. So from the OEM's perspective, the leasing companies or the financing companies which are operating on the conventional business models are asking us as OEMs to put in security deposits, to put in FLDGs to the extent of 5% of the vehicle cost, 10% of the vehicle cost, and give them buyback warranties. So it's a very, very discouraging situation for an OEM. But to think from their perspective also, why they're asking for this is that they're uncertain about the vehicle performance. They're uncertain that if the vehicle is going to last for the duration of the financing or not. And the second most important thing is that the major maintenance cost in an EV is perceived to be high. That post a 3-year warranty period, which is there in most of the two-wheeler and three-wheeler segments, so the battery replacement cost is perceived to be incurred by the financiers. So battery replacement in itself is not a very transparent operation right now, because any OEM who's selling the vehicle today is not disclosing or is not making it extremely transparent that after 3 years or after 4 years, what is going to be the cost of the battery if you have to replace it. So from an OEM's perspective, what I can add on to this is, to add value to this, we have to increase the warranty period of the vehicle, or specifically the battery. And secondly, we need to make the battery serviceable. So if I know that my cells are providing me 2000 cycles, so I need to make it at least serviceable after my 4-year warranty period. I would not force the customer to replace the entire battery pack. I would make it serviceable. If any particular component in that needs to be replaced, that sorts of transparency and that sorts of capability needs to be provided by me. So this is what we can do to ease out the pain.
Yeah, I think the OEM plays a very critical role to start the. See, each player in this ecosystem has to do something more than what they have typically done. That's really what it is, right? The fleet provider has to put their balance sheet up. The OEM has to put their balance sheet on the table. So,
I just have a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, just adding to what you were saying, the other problem, I mean, why, and absolutely, he was on point when there has to be transparency. What happens after 3 years or 4 years of warranty? What do we do with the battery pack, and what type of replacement cost we have to offer? But the problem that we face today, and these are conversations we have already had, and the conversations haven't been very fruitful. The problem that we face today is the cell is the majority of cost in a battery pack. It's 70%, let's say. The trend has been so far that in the last 1 year, 85% jump in cell pricing has happened, which had come down to a level in the last decade. It has kind of, it was 2x jump basically. So now if the trend is so volatile, how do we say what is the battery cost 4 years down the line? So this is something which is I don't think is a problem an OEM can solve single-handedly. It's a problem of the ecosystem. I mean, so I think yes, easily.
Approximately $130 to $150 per kilowatt.
No, but some of the OEMs are saying they are importing with all the charges for 225 per kilowatt.
See, for LFP, I think it's in the range of 180. Yeah, but NMC and other things could be little higher. Till last year, I think LFP was in the range of, at least the cells that we were getting was 100, 110. From there, it is now at 180, 190 in that range.
So one of the things which I see here is that what probably OEMs can do is that, see, OEM is confident about his product. It's the buyer who is not confident about the product. Right. Probably you bring in something which a BMW or Audi did to just, the cost of ownership is high, agreed. But then they say, okay, fine, it's a 4-year plan, I'm going to lease it and then I'm going to buy back. So that will give a lot of confidence to people who are trying it for the first time. And it is only one cycle which you have to run. Once it is done, then probably it is a direct ownership model.
Just a small point. See, what has happened in the Indian EV ecosystem is not all products are always good. There were a lot of shortcuts taken, which caused also some level of, delayed the thing and all. So now the focus is very clear. You need to create a deeply engineered vehicle so that you can back it up tomorrow. And the use cases are many, and the positive arguments are all there. But the product has to stack up. And that's the beginning of it. And OEM has to play a role until and unless we have the resellers and all coming up and saying we are there too.
Right. So I'm sorry, Jayant. Again, I'm gonna be. I'm gonna be.
Just going to make one of the biggest pain point for the OEM is the GST. Today we are paying in input GST of 18% to 28%, and when we sell the vehicle, we realize a GST of 5%, and the remaining is stuck in an inverted duty structure. So the entire profit for an OEM is basically locked into the GST refund.
No, so as a fleet operator also, we have a huge GST implication where the input costs are billed at 18% and we are billing at 5% with no input credit. So that's a fair 13% hit we also take. But I heard you saying the challenges for an OEM, but as a fleet operator who uses your product, and I'll build on what Manish said, if the OEM doesn't back its product, somewhere, I don't know, the second life industry or the buyback post the lease tenure, that system somebody has to build, right? That bridge somebody has to build. So we've worked with a lot of OEMs and we face this issue. A financer can never get assurance if an OEM isn't ready to put their buck on the table for their product, right? So that's again.
Two ways for the OEM, right? Two ways. One, of course, you start with a good product, a well-engineered product, that's table stakes. On top of that, two things that one can do. One is, of course, you have, like in cars, we can have a car trade or a car wale or somebody who says we will have so much resale value, and that is a tripartite between the OEM and the fleet, and that's one way. The second thing, I don't know if it's possible, but to explore, but to have a second life arrangement with a recycler, right? Because you've bought the packs and you're either leasing it or you're finding a solution for it. So the battery itself should have some monetizable value attached up front, and you figure that out.
So I have a question for the OEMs at the table right now, and we're talking so much about second life and buyback and things like that, right? So how financially feasible is it for you guys when you're looking at a lifespan of a vehicle for say 4 or 5 years, and you have to buy back that electric, freight 3-wheeler or a 4-wheeler, when it comes to self-propulsion. So what financial sense does that make for you?
So I'll answer this to get to the root cause. It's wrong to perceive that if the warranty for the vehicle is for 3 years or 4 years, the life of the vehicle is also 3 years. So effectively, lithium LFP battery pack, the cell manufacturers provide a life cycle of 2000 plus if they are operated in adequate, well conditions. But what majority of the OEMs are not taking into consideration is that India is a warmer geography. So the temperature here goes up to 45 degrees, 50 degrees. So none of the vehicles have got an active thermal management system in place. So we have included the active thermal management system to run the battery pack at an optimum temperature and get the desired number of cycle life from the cell. Secondly, once the cells become weak, there are mechanisms to balance out the cells using power electronics. So we are using active balancers to put it into the pack as a part of service so that we don't need to replace the entire pack. So we are confident on this, and resultantly we are able to increase the warranty period from a 3-year generic norm to a 4-year warranty. Plus, we are also working on technologies to service the battery pack after 4 years and to effectively get a life of 5 to 6 years rather than a 3-year usable life.
So See, there are, as per our understanding, there are two major considerations here. One thing is that any vehicle manufacturer in India doesn't have a full control on the cell and cell design, which will be a very big input to characterize and understand the depreciation of the battery packs and cells over their entire usage. Even the end of life value, or rather the value at a 3-year or a 4-year time duration, would have a very great, a very great bearing on the cell design and cell characteristics. That is something that's not readily available. Now, in this kind of a situation, if we are trying to understand and come up with a model to put a number, what would be the buyback value or what would be the price of the battery pack at the end of 3 years, 4 years, or even at the end of life, which can be 5 or 6 years, that runs a risk that whether we'll be able to get that kind of a value 4 years down the line, even if we are looking at a model of putting it into stationary storage or into recycling. The prices that are being offered today from a recycler are the only reference point that can be taken to offer a buyback price for these battery packs. It depends. For LFP, they are offering like 20-25% only as the price at which they'll take your scrap cells. But that is for a scrap cell. Now, if you don't have cell design parameters, you cannot very accurately determine what is the health available in the cell after 3 or 4 years. Your cell might not be completely dead at the end of 4 years. You might be able to use it in stationary storage or for some other application for few years before you send it as a scrap cell to a recycler. That I would say is a very big R&D topic itself to characterize the.
Yeah, so
that is something which we can already, which we are doing, and which we can effectively help the financing companies like Alt and all to monitor. Because once we put the battery pack on an application, our battery management systems are monitoring the various parameters and also calculating the degradation of the cells. So we can at least from our side give the transparent data on the battery pack health at an individual cell level. So the financing companies like Alt Mobility and all could very well then understand that if they can also monetize the battery pack for a higher value. And we can also facilitate that thing by having back-to-back tie-ups in case of using these battery packs for stationary storage applications and providing them a second life. And once that is also done, then only the scrapping should come into the picture for recycling.
Yeah.
See just a point on that. The problem is, typically the vendors who are giving the cells, they will give you, as he was saying, 2000. Let's say 2000 is a standard number, 2000 cycles, which if you're charging every day, translates to roughly 4.5 years of life. Now, they don't take any kind of guarantee on what happens. Typically, they will say it's at 83% of capacity fade at the 2000th cycle, but what happens from 2000 first cycle, no one takes guarantee for that. Now, obviously an OEM has to invest in a lot of R&D, accelerated testing to understand after 2000 cycle, how many more cycles and is the degradation linear or not. That's where it becomes very tricky because there is no data from any of the vendors that what happens after the 2000 cycle. Whatever we can do as a guarantee or a warranty on a buyback is basically has to be limited to that 2000 cycle space. Anything beyond that, where you want to do a second life, which should at least run for another 3-4 years, you will easily touch 3000 or 4000 cycles, but there is no data. So that's
which is where we come in and we say we don't want buyback guarantees from you. What we want is access to data. So we want access to cell level data within your vehicles to understand what the degradation is, what the health of the battery is, so that we can dynamically estimate the residual value of that vehicle at any given point in time.
Yeah, he's saying
So
that it is only limited to 4,000 cycles.
2000 cycles. Yeah.
So what we do is we basically firstly understand the complete BOM of the vehicle. So from OEMs, we ask for every detailed component level breakup of battery pack, mechanical components, body, every single component. Now, the residual value is not just an estimation of what that component would look like, let's say 3 years down the line. It is also a factor of not just technology, but also a factor of what the market price and dynamics look like 3 years later. Right, so factoring both of these components in. So from a technical level, you're understanding the state of health of the battery pack. You're understanding what is the capacity utilization that was committed by the OEM, what is the capacity utilization right now, how many kilometers can it run. You can measure that with regards to the vehicle efficiency, and you're able to estimate what would be the life of that battery pack or how many further kilometers it can run. And also understand if the battery pack needs to be replaced. Now, we don't ask OEMs what that battery pack cost to commit the battery pack cost 3 years later. We know that it's going to be more or maybe even less, probably less. So we don't ask them to commit for that particular number. We say after the 3-year tenure, our lease rentals will be revised. And at that point in time, we will compute what the residual value is, what the new battery pack replacement cost is, and any other components that need to be replaced. And we then finance the upgrade of that vehicle. And that upgrade cost in our estimate is 40% lower than the original lease rental that we're charging.
But all of this you will be doing in the 2000 cycle space, right? I mean, because there is, to predict it beyond the 2000 cycle, you really have to invest in a lot of testing, accelerated life testing of the cell, and each cell will have different behavior. I mean, depending on who is the manufacturer and all those things.
Absolutely.
So this 2000 cycle rule is basically not a generic rule, because the cells, if the usable capacity of the pack is degraded by 20%, then ideally the pack is retired. So that is retired from an automotive application. But a pack which is having 50% usable capacity also could be very well used in a storage application by paralleling 2 packs like this.
Yeah, there's no doubt about the fact that there could be cells that can be, reused. My only question to you, and see, what he would do in his system would be a different algorithm, right? It is not, they would have some other parameters on which they have modeled on how the prices would go up or down, or what could be potentially a pathway of that for the cell, etc. But as an OEM, you know this best. See, you are the one who designed the cell, etc. And so you're still saying, that's where the bottleneck is, you're still saying that you can't think or understand or compute beyond the 2000 cycles, which is what you've been told by the vendor that you bought the cell from. Now, I'm just saying, how can we break that barrier? Because if we break that, then everyone will come. Because you have the last word on how good that cell is. So even if you took it to a recycler and the recycler said, "Main to itna hi dunga," you can say, "Nahi, boss."
So what I'm saying is this. I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm saying it's doable for a particular cell from a particular vendor. It will have so the trend beyond the first life, right? Where you're servicing a automotive this thing. The trend beyond the first life is completely dependent on who is manufacturing, what type of, cell they have made, and the signature of the cell from the vendor itself. So today, let's say I have a cell from, let's say, a Panasonic. I can do a completely accelerated test and tell you that this will happen on the 5000 cycle also. I can predict and give you. But tomorrow, if I change the cell from Panasonic to an LG Chem, I will have to again do that test, and that will change the overall model that
How often do you change it? Why is it not possible for you to?
I mean, you have to have multiple vendors in this supply chain situation that you have. You have to have multiple vendors. You cannot depend on one.
It's a matter of scale and all that.
Yes.
I would just like to add on to this. We cannot change the cell very often, because once we get a cell type approved, the battery pack is type approved and the vehicle is type approved with that. So all this exercise takes around 40 to 50 lakh rupees of expenditure and around 3 to 4 months of time in getting the type approval. Either I get 3 or 4 different variants approved by different cells in the beginning itself. But it's not going to be a routine exercise. Cell is a very critical component and it needs to be firmed up.
Last point, I think what we can also do is that we won't formulate this into a formal proceedings that we can then take policy makers. But
I was just summarizing actually. I was just saying from what is coming out of all this, in my understanding, and everyone can add on, I think is that the core of this whole financing thing, and there are several layers to it. It builds up from basement to probably the 12th floor. But I think the base of it is the understanding and the assessment of the cell. Either the OEM does it for the pack and the cell, or the recycler does it, right? And says, and I've heard of technologies like this being in place in Europe, etc., where the recycler will, when you give them the pack, they'll assess it. They'll tell you, okay, this is the value. So that, if that can be assessed, that will give you the foundation for the resale value, and that from there builds the entire layer of.
Vasudha, when we talk about recycling also, so NMC cells have got a higher value in terms of salvageable material. Nickel is there, copper is there, and all this is there. But in LFP cells, the usable material or the valuable material quantity is less because it's ferrous. So that is one of the aspects, but salvageable value itself is going to be always going to be the scrap value. It's not the larger component of the realizable aspect. The larger realizable aspect is if we can use the cell for a larger duration, either by electronically balancing it or by using it in alternate applications. So that is what we are trying to do as OEMs.
And we did have a conversation with one of these cell recycling companies, which has just recently come up. The value for a 10 kilowatt hour battery pack, which costs 2 lakh, the cost that they said was 10,000 rupees. So the objective wasn't for us. We were immediately sure that it's not about putting this back to recycling. How do we put this in secondary storage applications? Because the lifetime of a battery pack is 15 years. It can run in mobility for maybe 3 to 4 years, but after that, it really needs to be redeployed in a different asset class.
It need not be. We are not saying, when we say recycler, we're not saying extract the materials and reuse it. We're saying reuse it in other, re-put them in a pack. All of that is called reuse or second life or whatever. Second life slash, But I think core of this is use of technology to understand and assess the cell, the afterlife of the cell or the second life of the cell, and that technology has to be invested in. I think between the OEM and the end of life buyer, this technology has to be in place.
I think this discussion can essentially keep going on. I don't think we're going to find a logical end to it immediately. But I would like all the speakers here to take a little bit of time to kind of try and pick out two main, next steps for each stakeholder in terms of whether it's going to be technology or is it going to be in the operational business model space or whether it's going to be financing. So maybe we can just go for one last round of final comments. And yes, absolutely. And I think there is just one question we can take, but the conversation can continue during lunch as well. So very quick. 2 points in terms of takeaways.
Sure. Battery technology assumes a lot of importance here, as we have all concluded upon, because financing and everything is dependent upon that. And the second thing is a policy initiative also to promote the critical, to resolve the critical problems like a charging infrastructure problem or a other GST related issues or something like that. So all these are the critical takeaways for me.
Keeping it short, I emphasized enough and more on EV financing. I think that's one key sphere. And number two, a good and reliable product. I think that's my two.
Business operations wise, I think for us as an operator, DCO is going to be a game changer. At this point in time, drivers do not want to own a vehicle, electric vehicle, because they don't see a resale value, don't know what it is going to be after 3 years. And the angst, I could relate to Rohit's angst is the financing side of it. These are the two next steps that we need to work on.
Honestly, I have a cop-out answer. Since I come from the HCV segment where we have not seen any deployment at scale or anything, I think for me the learning is, the experience that everyone at LCV is having. I'm pretty sure 5 years down the line that will reflect in the HCV segment again.
So as an OEM, I think two main points. One is, product reliability is something which is definitely, we are definitely working towards it, but it will only boost more confidence into the overall ecosystem, and also getting out more intelligence on second life and usability of the cell to make a better economics of the product. So these two, I think, are the next steps as an OEM that we have to work on.
From my perspective, I think the next steps that we should be focusing and working on is bringing various stakeholders of this ecosystem together, because for commercial vehicles, the ecosystem will have to come in place first before the adoption can happen. So the operators, the financiers, the energy providers, the vehicle manufacturers, how they are coming together and partnering with each other to build out that support ecosystem, which creates the push for adoption of electric commercial vehicles. That I think should be the next step that everyone should be focusing and working towards.
I think for me, one is the policy decision is going to be very, very critical before we do anything. The second is standardization, because I think there's a lack of standardization on our side, but even on this side of the table, there's a need for proper standardization, then it will work better.
I'll just cover from the WRI perspective for us. I think I'll take the offer from Mr. Satish that we want to do more of these kind of discussions. I think it will be important in different geographies. And also what just now Nakul was saying, right, to bring the awareness in the ecosystem also about in this issue. I think some of them are very first for us also, honestly. I think even that GST thing that, we had heard in other sectors, but clearly understanding and pinpointing, I think this is the kind of pointers that we would need, because talking at an aggregator level, we can say, okay, everything is a problem, but getting to specifics is what is critical for us, so that, then we can go and actually help talk to policy makers to really make them understand the nitty-gritties, because I think that's where the devil lies in the details, where we need to specifically then say, okay, how do we address this at a scheme or at a bigger level? I think that's the big takeaway for us.
One key takeaway for me is developing a forum where all stakeholders can come together, have a conducing discussions, and how it can get into feedback mechanism is something which is needed and we all need to work on.
Thanks. So EVs are all about efficiency. We're switching to combustion to electric is not just clean, it's also bringing in more efficiencies into every single aspects of the business. We believe it's going to transform efficiency in operations, efficiency in financing. I think this can only be achieved through a collaborative approach where all stakeholders are working together. I think that was very clear during this discussion, was that everyone has a part to play and we all need to come together to kind of come in and solve these problems. And we believe that if data is going to play a big part in bringing out that efficiency. From a fleet management perspective, it's about vehicle utilization. From an OEM, it's about battery degradation. From a financing perspective, all these data points help us underwrite better and essentially end up reducing the cost of capital, which we're all striving towards. And that's going to essentially result in more catalyzing of debt being more active in this space. So that's I think collaboration, having more of these sessions would be fantastic. Yeah.
So for me, I think based on all the 2 sessions and listening into the masterclass, I think one of the important takeaways that has come out of this discussion has been standardization, right? Both from the from the technology aspect, we're looking at I think Jayant, you mentioned about the DC001. There's no standardization, there's no open sourcing. Standardization in charging infrastructure, standardization across different models, how the technology evolves. Standardization even in the logistical movement. I think Mr. Satish Lakraju was talking about it, and standardization in the form of even financing models, which I think most of the OEMs and also all the other stakeholders talking about. So I think one of the biggest takeaways for me has been standardization across all the different segments. So yeah.
I think a key takeaway for me has been the role that technology can play to understand the cell, and that I think will solve a lot of help in price discovery. The other point I want to add is that since I'm in touch with a lot of global investors, I do see that there is a lot of interest from global equity investors in backing asset-heavy platforms also, which was not typically the case, because now there is a move towards green financing and funding. So there are people who are willing to invest even into asset-heavy platforms as long as some level of scale is achieved. So I think we really need to harness some level of global financing as well to help some of these companies along the way, and it pretty much describes the reason for why I started this firm.
Well, very enriching session. I think these sessions should happen more often. Though most of the things which I thought of are already covered, I think it's collaboration, standardization. But if I have to really take two things which I think very important, one probably is going to be availability of more reliable vehicles and confidence of the partner of the OEM on the vehicles. That is one. And probably what you said, easy financing. So I think that would really bring the hump down and people will jump the gun and adopt the vehicles.
Thanks. I'm going to ask Ruchir, who is online, if he can share his two thoughts.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. Very, very interesting and very engaging and deep discussions, and rather it really triggered a couple of my early days, early 2000, when I started working in automotive and especially in electric vehicle. I was working with Reva those days. It was little late 2000. And many of the things I heard today are still valid. Second use of batteries, you can think of guys who are all here, what was the cost then, which was like about $1,000 per kilowatt hour, right? Whether you use it ATO, Boston Power, Thunder Sky, all sorts of batteries. So it was good that Chetan had that kind of patience. That passion that drove that. Now, while all these are very different problems and challenges, and these are going to be addressed by the right competent set of people, also will demand a huge capex. Our friends who are in R&D or engineering side, they all know that there will be hardly any facilities today in India who can really support that absolute cell level testing and bringing it to the level of quality pack which we are all addressing today, especially for the larger vehicles when you're talking about 600 or 800 volt DC bus. Now, one thing from policy perspective which comes to my mind is how can we increase the volumes at 10 to 50 times or 100 times, right? A lot of things will start happening automatically to some extent, at least easing up financing, much more people taking much interest. So one element is how can we push to have, say, 20 or 50 such zero emission zones identified. Now, zones here can be a freight corridor, it can be a selected ports, it can be specific portions of cities or a cluster. How can we really look at that as a very strong common voice that let's have that as a absolute market created. On the second hand, was just thinking aloud on the corner cafe norms. On the other end, how can we really bring much more stringent options so as it creates a valid push from the fleet and users and owners standpoint to start looking at that as another options to provide some creative room. And third is on the supply side policies. Thank you, and I'll be personally more than happy to see from Shakti standpoint and along with the WRI what best we can do to ease up a couple of these issues. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to just take a quick moment to give a vote of thanks. Given we are really running late for lunch, I'll keep it short and simple. We're looking at electrification as a big step and a big push towards mitigating emissions. We're also looking at it for energy security. Now, in multiple studies and within WRI as well, we see that freight being a big player in this. As the sector grows and as the number of goods movement increases, the amount of emissions from the freight sector is going to increase tremendously. And this is going to be addressed only through efficiencies, through data, using data-based decision making, and through electrification. However, this is, as we have discussed today, this is not a simple thing that is going to happen. As anything that starts new, it's going to need a lot of discussion and a lot of unraveling. And we hope that we are able to have these discussions more often so that we can unravel more and we can also help inform a lot of the larger strategies that are going into this piece. We thank all of you to take the time and to make time for this discussion. I hope it has been as intriguing, as informative for all of you as it has been for all of us. Thank you so much.